The proceeding will
Order. A point of order, Jane Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that this House do now sit in private.
The question is, this House sit in private. As many of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. No! I think the noes have it, Nearly. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Animal welfare, import of dogs, cats and ferrets bill, second reading.
No. Right, I now call Selaine Saxby to move it.
I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Pets are a part of our family. They provide support and companionship when we need it most. And in time-honoured Friday tradition, I would like to name my own pets, from Perdita, my childhood cat, through Phoebe, adopted whilst I live in the States, my yellow Labradors, Harry and George, and my current much-adored fox red Labrador, Henry.
Has the Honourable Lady ever owned... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Honourable Lady ever owned a ferret? And what was that ferret's name?
Yeah. It's an excellent intervention, and I will come on to ferrets, but unfortunately I haven't had the pleasure of one at home myself. The companionship from pets was certainly highly valued during the pandemic, where there was a surge in demand for puppies and kittens, which unfortunately led to even more upsetting cases of pet smuggling in the UK. During COVID, legal commercial imports of dogs rose by nearly 60% to over 70,000 dogs in 2021, and trends in illegal imports could be expected to be similar. As an MP, puppy and kitten smuggling was something that came on my radar shortly after the first lockdown began in March 2020. I myself was one of those people trying to find a new pup, which were hard to even find, and I'm grateful to my great dog-loving friend Bethany Sawyer for her advice to not see the cute puppy, which was the wrong age, without both parents available in the advert. Whilst Henry, my fox red Labrador, was not smuggled into the country, I met his mum and dad at their farm just above my North Devon home. I understand that the emotions of adopting a new pet and companion often leave some of the rationality in questioning behind. Prices for specific dog breeds doubled, and the UK market struggled to keep up. With huge profits to be made, this imbalance provided ample opportunity for people acting illegally and irresponsibly to import puppies and take advantage of innocent pet buyers who may not have known that their furry friends were suffering. UK Gov polling shows that 83% of the public want the government to crack down on puppy smuggling. I was the PPS on the Bill Committee for the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill. Oh, yes. And I'm delighted to be flanked by the whip from the same committee, my honourable friend, the member for South Derbyshire, and other members of that Bill Committee still supporting this bill. We've seen over 100 colleagues drop in just this week to see the Dogs Trust to support the bill alone. When the bill was withdrawn and divided up, I made a commitment to the RSPCA and the Dogs Trust that if I came high up on the private members' bill ballot, I would take part of the original animal bill through. But not a regular raffle prize winner was more than a bit perplexed to find myself sixth. Looked at Henry, who I'm not sure still fully understands all the media attention, and explained that we were going to be helping puppies for many months to come. And I am delighted that I have been able to keep that commitment here today. As a dog owner myself, it is horrific to hear stories of puppies and kittens being smuggled across the border and the poor conditions they have to endure. Pets are more than just property, they are family, and the Animal Welfare Importation of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill will ensure that pets are not sold or traded as objects.
I'm grateful to her for giving way. This is such an important bill, and I know the passion and the eloquence with which she brings it forward. Does she agree with me that the government must put the funding at the border to make sure that this is actually dealt with and the puppy and kitten smuggling and indeed ferret smuggling is stopped? And it is a concern that currently DEFRA have reduced or proposed to reduce biosecurity funding at the Port of Dover and in the Dover area, and they must put money behind this important initiative.
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's indeed a huge advocate for her constituency and the Port of Dover, and as a member of the EFRA Select Committee, we are indeed looking at some of the matters that she raises. This bill will deliver a manifesto commitment to crack down on puppy, kitten and ferret smuggling by closing loopholes exploited by unscrupulous commercial traders.
I'm really grateful for the Honourable Lady for giving way and for the passionate case she's making for a bill I think we all support. Her legislation relies quite extensively on regulations. I wonder if she has a sense of how quickly these regulations will come forward as and when, hopefully when the bill passes.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I very much hope the Minister will be able to provide some guidance on that at the end of this session. The bill will ban the import of puppies and kittens under 6 months and dogs and cats that are mutilated or heavily pregnant. It will also address the current abuse of non-commercial rules that compromise animal welfare and biosecurity by making it more difficult and less profitable for traders to fraudulently import animals for sale under the disguise of owners travelling with their own pets. The bill also seeks to address the current issue of commercial imports being disguised as non-commercial movements by amending the rules that govern the non-commercial movements of dogs, cats and ferrets into Great Britain from third countries. Currently, the puppy trade has become a multi-million transnational industry with UK sales of up to 2 million puppies annually and a value of £3 billion. However, 50% of the industry is either illegal or unlicensed and off the enforcement radar, and of that, half originates from animals coming from outside of the UK. According to the Animal and Plant Health Agency, in 2023, over 500 landings of dogs and cats were intercepted at the Port of Dover and found to be non-compliant with import requirements. Of these, 116 puppies and kittens were quarantined for being below the legally required minimum age for import. This data does not include animals detained at airports or found inland. We cannot know the true extent of puppy smuggling operations, and so these figures likely only capture a small portion of the animals smuggled into the country. Ferrets are included in this bill because dogs, cats and ferrets are in the same category when it comes to rabies risk. I have not had strong representations from the ferret community, but I would like to place my right honourable friend, the member for Banbury's ferret, on the record. The Minister for the original bill, her gorgeous ferret Roulette, is no longer with us, but I know the now Attorney General has previously ensured so many of her much-loved pets are recorded in this place, and I'm delighted to remember Roulette today. So whilst not many ferrets have made my inbox, I have done much to support the work of our fantastic animal welfare charities on puppy and kitten smuggling, so we'll be focusing on their travel arrangements. Pet animals can be brought into the UK from EU member states through 2 different schemes. One is for travel of owners with pets and the other for the commercial import of pet animals. Under the EU Pet Travel Scheme, or PETS, vaccinated and microchipped dogs, cats and ferrets are allowed to travel between EU countries for non-commercial reasons, as long as they have a pet passport and have complied with all the requirements of the scheme, which includes a rabies vaccination. The current Pets Travel Scheme is designed to allow a maximum of 5 pets to travel with their owner, rather than for the commercial movement of animals intended for sale as pets. Under the scheme, pet owners must fill in a declaration confirming that they are not going to sell or transfer the ownership of the pet. An approved transport company must be used for the travel of pets, unless travelling between the UK and Ireland, where a private boat or plane can be used. Whilst I understand that the Pet Travel Scheme was created to make it easy for owners to take their family pets on holiday with them, the system has been abused by unscrupulous traders. Traders have taken advantage of the scheme's simple setup to illegally import thousands of puppies for sale, making huge profit at the cost of welfare. The most common methods of attempting to smuggle puppies into Great Britain are by bringing puppies to Great Britain under the Pets Travel Scheme, when the puppies are in fact being imported for commercial sale and should instead be subject to the requirements of the Ballet Directive and Trade Animals and Related Products regulations. Most of all today, I would like to highlight the great work that the pet charities have done to raise this issue. The Dogs Trust exposed the cruel puppy smuggling trade in 2014 and has been pushing for changes to the law to help stop it ever since. The Dogs Trust Puppy Pilot Scheme was set up in 2015 to aid the interception of illegally imported puppies by AFA, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, at the ports, and provide care and rehabilitation for them until they find loving new homes. Since then, they have cared for more than 2,000 puppies.
Unbelievable.
As part of the Dogs Trust Puppy Smuggling Task Force, I first experienced the documentary and identity checks currently operating at the border, I saw for myself the tactics smugglers employ to avoid detection. I would like to thank the Dogs Trust for all their hard work campaigning on this issue and working with me on the progress of this bill through the roundtable and the event this Wednesday to discuss their recent tragic tales and the Decade of Delay campaign, which featured 4 real-life case studies of dogs who have been helped via the puppy pilot. A special thanks goes to my local Dogs Trust site in North Devon between Ilfracombe and Braunton, who do exceptional work to rehome dogs locally. I would also like to thank the RSPCA for their work on this issue and for their Pup's Sake campaign, especially during the pandemic when the interest in getting a puppy skyrocketed. The campaign called for the stop in illegal puppy imports and highlighted how these smuggled puppies can cost the owner more than they think. And on behalf of the fluffy furry kittens, I would like to thank Cats Protection, who have also published their 2023 Cats and Their Stats survey, which found that 3% of the cats that were obtained in the 12 months preceding the survey were from abroad, equating to 50,000 cats. And it is unclear what condition those cats were subjected to during travel. There have been significant changes in the cat market in the last 5 years, with a big rise in purebred and pedigree cats. Of the cats obtained in the last 12 months, 42% of them were pedigree and purebred cats, compared to 17% 5 years ago. It is likely that many of the imported cats are pedigree. Having had a cat myself whilst I was living overseas, I know that cats are extremely stressed by transportation over long distances, which in turn can suppress their immune systems, so their risk of infectious disease and other stress-related illness is markedly increased by importation. The vet charities such as the British Veterinary Association have also raised directly with me that a large number of smuggled puppies entering the UK poses significant threats to the UK's biosecurity. Whilst this is not in the scope of this bill, I hope that in raising it today, it is a first step and that the department will be taking these concerns forward. Yeah. Other charities such as Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, Four Paws, the Kennel Club have all done invaluable work to campaign on this issue, and I would like to thank them all today. Moving to the bill itself, the measures in the bill which will be enacted through primary legislation are Clause 4, to reduce the number of animals that can travel under non-commercial rules from 5 per person to 5 per vehicle or 3 per foot or air passenger. I know the charities would have preferred 3 animals per vehicle, as their research shows that over 97% of pet owners have 3 or fewer dogs. However, this reduction is a significant and welcome step to tackle illegal smuggling of pets. The non-commercial rules are intended to make it easier for genuine pet owners to travel, but those unscrupulous traders fraudulently claim ownership of several pets that they are actually importing for sale. They do this because the requirements for owners travelling with pets are less stringent. The bill reduces the number of dogs, cats and ferrets that can be brought into Great Britain non-commercially, and reducing that number is considered proportionate and takes into consideration other pets owned by the household that may also travel. Clause 4, Article 5A, that ensures that when a non-commercial movement of a dog, cat or ferret is carried out by an authorised person, it may only take place within 5 days of the movement of the owner. There is evidence that the ability for a pet to travel with an authorised person under the non-commercial rules is being used as a loophole to bring in animals that should be moved under the commercial import regime and therefore subject to more stringent requirements for sale or transfer of ownership. The new measures will ensure that pets are moved under the owner's direct responsibility or where the pet animal cannot be moved at the same time as the owner under the responsibility of a person authorised by the owner and within 5 days of the movement of the owner. An authorised person is a person who has authorisation in writing from the owner to carry out the non-commercial movement of the pet animal on behalf of the owner. This will also ensure that only an owner of the pet can sign a declaration that a movement is non-commercial. This will stop non-commercial routes being used as a loophole by traders. And movements that are not within 5 days will require the dog, cat or ferret to be brought in as a commercial import rather than a non-commercial movement. Then the measures to be made in secondary legislation. The bill contains an enabling power to make regulations about the bringing of dogs, cats or ferrets into the United Kingdom for the purpose of promoting their welfare. The first regulations that can be made in relation to dogs and cats in Great Britain under this enabling power have been outlined on the face of the bill to provide reassurance of the government's intention to lay these measures through secondary legislation. The enabling powers provide the opportunity for government to gather further evidence and discuss the proposals with stakeholders and the public in order to develop these new restrictions effectively. The powers will enable the government to tackle low welfare imports dynamically. It will allow us the flexibility to address known issues quickly, but also act in the future to close down emerging practices, including those attempting to circumvent previous restrictions. The government will use this power alongside the other powers in the bill. Clause 1, subsections 3 and 4, Part A, introduces prohibitions which restrict the commercial import and non-commercial movement into Great Britain of puppies and kittens under 6 months. We are still seeing high volumes of smuggled puppies, dogs under 6 months which do not comply with current animal health rules and are landed in Great Britain for the purpose of commercial sale, as well as other low welfare movements and imports of pet animals. I understand concerns brought forward to me by the Kennel Club about genetic diversity and in some cases the need for rescue dogs that are brought into the country at the age of 4 months. However, the need for it to be a minimum age of 6 months is due to the practicalities of identifying an age of a dog or a cat that can come into the UK. This is because at 6 months old, the majority of puppies and kittens will have a full set of permanent incisors, canine and premolar teeth, and can therefore be aged more accurately. This will enable identification of puppies and kittens which are being moved at young ages and are thus at risk of low welfare. This prohibition would be intended to prevent the import of underage puppies and kittens by increasing the minimum age from 15 weeks to 6 months. To illustrate the importance of this, I want to talk about Bruce, who is available after today's sittings for photos, Mr. Speaker, in W3 if you would like to meet him. Bruce highlights the need for a ban on a minimum age of 6 months. A French bulldog who was seized at the border at just 10 weeks, alongside 3 of his siblings, who had all endured a journey in cramped and squalid conditions over thousands of miles from Bulgaria in 2018. This is well under the 15 weeks that puppies must be to legally enter the UK. Bruce and his siblings were found in poor condition, infested with worms, and were severely underweight when they were seized. All 4 of the dogs weighed roughly 2.8 kilograms, which is half the expected weight of French bulldogs at their age. Their passports were faked, with at least 3 of them claiming that they had been wormed before they were even born. The dishonest traders claimed that Bruce and his siblings were all their own pets. However, upon seizure, Dogs Trust staff were able to find evidence online of all 4 dogs being advertised for sale. Fortunately for Bruce, Dogs Trust were then able to take him in and care for him until he could find his forever home. Bruce has been now rehomed responsibly through the Dogs Trust. He's a very cute French bulldog. Some of these dogs are bred for fashion, and the Kennel Club, along with other animal charities and vets, have highlighted the health and welfare issues that can be associated with these breeds. And whilst the issues of breeding and flat-faced dogs are a genetic mutilation, and therefore not in the scope of the bill, I would like to highlight the need to still safeguard these dogs who are already in the country. We must look at what else we can do to help with these genetic mutilations that cause our pets to suffer. It was reassuring to hear at Crufts last week about their respiratory function grading RFG scheme for brachycephalic-faced dogs, such as French bulldogs, pugs and bulldogs. It was great to meet Dr. Jane Ludlow, who is the vet who has devised the scheme, which assesses dogs with a stethoscope. The dog exercises for 3 minutes and is then repeated. We saw the test firsthand, which is quick and straightforward, and assigns an RFG rating to each dog. Those with the lowest grades should not breed. Far too many flat-faced dogs have brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome, known as BOAS, which can chronically impair the ability of the dog to breathe normally and carry out everyday tasks. All the dogs at Crufts had the option of being tested, which becomes compulsory next year, and those that win had all been tested to ensure that the breed standard remains with high health standards. I hope by highlighting this issue today, it will ensure more potential pet owners ask questions about the health of the parents of their future pet.
I'm really glad that she's brought this up, and I don't know if the honourable member has been to Battersea and seen the number of, Hansard please, brachycephalic dogs that are going to them because pet owners cannot afford to have the operation, and they have seen an exponential rise in these dogs being dumped. So does she agree that much more needs to be done?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I have indeed been to Battersea, which is what really triggered a lot of my interest in this particular area, because I, like her, was deeply shocked by what I saw, which is why it was such a relief to see at Crufts this new system come into effect, which really does give you the opportunity to find out if your dog is unwell, but ideally to find out before you've adopted as a puppy. Cats Protection have also highlighted the issue of underage kitten smuggling, with Nala, who was smuggled illegally into the country when she was around 8 weeks old. She had been with her owners for 8 days when they brought her into the UK from Germany without a pet passport and appropriate vaccinations. They became concerned for her health and took her to a vet who realised she had arrived without meeting the requirements of the pet travel scheme and reported the matter to trading standards. The pet travel scheme, or PETS, allows pet cats, along with dogs and ferrets, to enter the UK without quarantine, as long as they are microchipped, have a pet passport, a rabies vaccination, and have waited 21 days after the vaccination before travelling. In addition to having broken the terms of PETS and facing prosecution, Nala's owners were also unable to pay the 7 weeks of quarantine costs, which came to £1,500, and so signed her over to feline welfare charity Cats Protection. The charity ensured the tiny cat was appropriately quarantined and received vet care before being taken into its Ferndown adoption centre. Despite being removed from her mother at around 7 weeks old, a week earlier than is advised, Nala was a lively, energetic kitten and a suitable home was found for her. Back to the bill, and Clause 1, subsection 3 and 4, Part B, introduces prohibitions which restrict the commercial import and non-commercial movement into Great Britain of heavily pregnant dogs and cats that are more than 42 days pregnant. There is an emerging trend in the import of pregnant dogs, but strong consensus to tackle this, with Dogs Trust polling showing 79% support a ban on the import of heavily pregnant dogs. This prohibition is intended to ensure the welfare of pregnant dogs and cats by lowering the gestation limit to prohibit the movement into Great Britain from a third party of dogs and cats who are pregnant for more than 42 days. This is within the final third of the gestation. This aligns with clear markers in pregnancy, and therefore pregnant dogs and cats under this limit can be more easily identified. In addition, we expect that traders will respond to an increase in the minimum age for importing puppies and kittens by increasing the number of pregnant dogs and cats that they import. This measure is needed to prevent this anticipated increase in imports of low welfare dogs and cats from producers with unacceptable welfare standards. The tragic case of Snowy, the heavily pregnant Bichon Maltese, shows how important this measure is in the bill. Snowy was seized at the port of Dover in May 2023 after being illegally transported into the UK. Before she was intercepted, Snowy had travelled to the UK from an EU country. Snowy was 56 days pregnant when she was seized, in the final 10% of her pregnancy, when it is illegal to transport dogs. Just days after she was seized, and despite her ordeal, Snowy gave birth to 4 healthy puppies, and Snowy and her puppies have all been responsibly rehomed through the Dogs Trust. The disturbing trend of transporting heavily pregnant dogs into the country in the later stages of pregnancy causes significant suffering and health implications to both mum and puppies. Not only will importing one dog attract less suspicion at the border, but as responsible buyers will ask to see the puppies with their mother, this tactic allows criminals to give the impression of being legitimate breeders and avoid being reported to trading standards. Clause 1, subsection 3 and 4, Part C, introduces prohibitions which restrict the commercial import and non-commercial movement into Great Britain of dogs and cats, with non-exempted mutilations, for example, dogs with cropped ears or dock-tailed and declawed cats. From my previous meetings with pet charities, there is a clear consensus among the charities on banning dogs and cats with cropped ears and the declawing of cats. There is a need for this to be included in the bill, and I am delighted that this has been taken forward. The attended approach on the prohibition of mutilated animals is set out in further detail within the DEFRA consultation, commercial and non-commercial movements of pets into Great Britain. The summary of responses and government response to this consultation are due to be published in due course, and I am very much looking forward to seeing the consultation response. The ban on cropped ears mutilations would have helped Maisie. 6-year-old Maisie came into RSPCA care in October 2023 due to welfare concerns. She was incredibly malnourished and underweight. She's a sweet and gentle girl who absolutely loves playing with a football, chasing tennis balls and eating sausages. She arrived in RSPCA care with a dock tail and cropped ears. She has a passport from overseas, so the RSPCA believes she's been imported, having already been cropped and docked. Unfortunately, it is not just dogs that are mutilated. Many kittens are subjected to declawing, an extremely painful and distressing procedure that prevents cats from exhibiting normal scratching behaviour. The procedure is the equivalent of amputating a human fingertip at the first knuckle. Whilst it is already illegal for cats to be declawed in the UK, Cats Protection, RSPCA and Battersea have been campaigning hard to ensure that these cats with this mutilation are included in the bill and banned from importation. This is both to deter any market or interest in declawed cats and keep in line with the UK, ensuring the highest standards of cat welfare are consistently maintained. The PDSA Animal Wellbeing Report 2022 states that alarmingly 5% of cat owners who got their cat from abroad, equating to 31,000 cats, told us that they chose to get their pet from abroad because they wanted them to be declawed. Clause 1, subsection 2b delivers relevant exemptions to the prohibitions, for example, recognised assistance dogs or military service and working animals. The enforcement measures and exemptions for the bill will be delivered through secondary legislation. As with the exemptions delivering the enforcement measures through secondary legislation, it will enable us to work closely with enforcement bodies to develop guidance and ensure they have the correct tools to deliver these measures effectively.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I commend her for bringing this bill forward. She will know, as with so much legislation we pass in this place, that it is only ever as effective as the enforcement that follows from it. And a 2014 Dogs Trust investigation found that 2 of the authorities involved in enforcing breaches of existing regulations in this area, namely the Animal and Plant Health Agency and Trading Standards, had no officers on active duty at ports of entry over weekends. So, as well as passing this welcome piece of legislation, does she agree that we need assurances from the Minister about resourcing and capacity of these agencies to ensure it is properly enforced when it comes into active force?
I thank the gentleman for his intervention, and yes, whilst I do agree we need to ensure the enforcement is there, as I said to my honourable friend from Dover, I also believe there is an opportunity in the House today to highlight the need to educate those people who are about to adopt a puppy or a kitten to be asking those questions, because if we don't adopt those animals that are being illegally imported, the trade in itself will dry up. So yes, I agree, but I do also think there is an opportunity here today to actually extend the knowledge that there's so much I've learned on the course of this bill about the process of adopting. So the reason why the measures outlined are being enacted through secondary legislation is really to refine the scope and detail of the policy and take on board the views of the public and key stakeholders. The bill provides that prohibitions must be enacted the first time, and the enabling power is used in relation to dogs and cats in Great Britain to show commitment to delivering these measures. I have been assured by the Department, who I would also like to thank for their help to getting to this point today, that they will lay secondary legislation as soon as possible following royal assent of the bill, and DEFRA officials are working on developing secondary legislation already. This will allow for future-proofing of the bill to respond dynamically to smuggling practices. As with the nature of organised crime, the illegal pet trade is unpredictable and ever-changing. These enabling powers will ensure the government can tackle low welfare imports dynamically. They provide the flexibility to address known issues quickly, but also act in the future to close down emergency practices where people are trying to circumvent previous restrictions. Finally, setting out how this will be applied as a GB-wide bill and the extent and application involving the devolved administration, Clause 3 sets out the meaning of appropriate national authority regarding devolved administrations. Clause 8 sets out the territorial extent of the bill, which describes the jurisdictions in which the bill forms part of the law. The territorial extent and application of the bill is England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, except for clauses 4, 5 and 6, which extend and apply only to England, Wales and Scotland. The bill relates to animal welfare, which is a devolved matter in Scotland and Wales, including in relation to the regulation of movements of animals in Scotland or Wales for the purposes of protecting animal welfare. As regards Northern Ireland, animal welfare is generally a transferred matter, but the subject matter of this bill means that the reserved matter in paragraph 20 of Schedule 3 to the Northern Ireland Act 1998 is engaged. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my DUP colleagues from Strangford and East Antrim who are unable to join us today, but they have written to support this bill.
She really is making an excellent speech this morning about this really important bill, which I fully support, and it's good to see that coming forward. She's outlined we're still waiting for consultation response from the government and other aspects, but would she agree with me that it really is deeply disappointing that the government dropped their animal welfare bill to look at these issues in the round more carefully, and actually we do need to see more greater action from the government on the whole area of animal welfare? Even though this will help, we need to see more.
Coming through, so no.
This government has done more for animal welfare than any previous one, and we will continue to do so. And like everyone, we were disappointed to see the bill collapse, but that was obviously due to amendments that were actually changing the nature of that original bill. And I very much hope and welcome the cross-party support to get this section of the bill through today. The amendments to the non-commercial pet travel scheme rules and related measures, which include the maximum number of dogs, cats and ferrets that can be moved into Great Britain and occur within 5 days of the owner's movements, will extend to England, Wales and Scotland. The bill does not apply to the domestic movement of dogs, cats and ferrets within our United Kingdom, so travel between Northern Ireland and Great Britain will not be affected. I know that there are many colleagues and friends in the Chamber here to support this bill today, and many may think that we have not gone far enough. But we need to be pragmatic with the measures in this bill, and we don't want perfection to be the enemy of the good.
Right.
I believe that this bill as it stands will do a lot to safeguard the welfare of the thousands of puppies, cats and ferrets that come into Great Britain from overseas each year. It will also prevent the heartache and unexpected costs to families who unknowingly buy young and ill pets that often come with hidden health conditions. The measures I have outlined today will aim to make vast animal welfare improvements to the current pet import rules. With secondary legislation, it will go further than the Kept Animals Bill to ensure that loopholes are tightened. I would like to again thank all the charities and interested groups who have shared their views about this bill, and I really hope that this bill has met some of the expectations and illustrated the positive steps that we are taking to stop this cruel trade. We really are a nation of animal lovers, a parliament of pet lovers, and this legislation will ensure that the UK is leading the world when it comes to animal welfare.
Question is that the bill be now read a second time. Samantha Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in today's debate on the animal welfare import of dogs, cats and ferrets bill. Cestrians are certainly fond of animals and animal rights, and I've received hundreds of items of correspondence from constituents regarding this bill and asking me to contribute to today's debate. And I'd like to congratulate the member for North Devon for securing the debate today. Like my honourable friend for Bristol South and many of my constituents, I was disappointed to learn of the scrapping of the Kept Animals Bill last year, a manifesto pledge on which this government stood. So I am pleased that some of the key issues from that bill are being addressed in this bill today. And again, congratulations to the honourable member.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Yes,
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that, as important as this bill is, and its provisions could have already been on the statute books by now if the government had not blocked Labour's efforts to revive the Kept Animals Bill last year?
Yes, indeed. I do agree with my honourable friend. This bill is a declaration of our commitment to compassion and responsibility towards our furry companions. It seeks to address several pressing issues concerning the importation of these animals, ensuring their safety, health and well-being. My constituency has always cared for and led the way when it comes to animal rights. Cheshire West and Chester Council was one of the first to permanently ban the practice of trail hunting on council-owned land. The National Trust soon followed suit. The changes introduced by the last Labour government have left an indelible mark on British history and have stood the test of time, from the bans on fox hunting and fur farming to the action taken to stop experimentation on great apes and the testing of cosmetics on animals. And we must ensure that we don't stop there. We should lead the way on animal welfare, and this bill is another step forward and long overdue. Puppies, kittens and other animals continue to be illegally imported into the UK on an industrial scale, alongside increasing numbers of heavily pregnant dogs and cats and animals with mutilations such as cropped ears. Every year, thousands of puppies are illegally imported into the UK to be sold to unsuspecting dog lovers, having been transported thousands of miles with little or no food, water or exercise. And I'm concerned there's a widespread abuse of the pet travel scheme by which animals are smuggled illegally, often underage, under-vaccinated and in poor welfare conditions. Dogs, cats and ferrets can enter the United Kingdom in one of two ways: as non-commercial pet travel movements or commercial imports. More stringent requirements apply to commercial imports than to non-commercial movements, and evidence has shown that commercial movements are frequently being described as non-commercial movements to avoid these more stringent requirements. In 2023, more than 500 landings of dogs and cats were intercepted at the port of Dover and found to be non-compliant with import requirements. Of these, 116 puppies and kittens were quarantined for being below the legally required minimum age for import. This data doesn't include animals detained at airports or found inland. We cannot know the true extent of puppy smuggling operations, and so these figures likely only capture a small portion of the animals smuggled into the country. According to Dogs Trust, since the relaxation of the pet travel scheme, PETS, in 2012, the number of dogs entering the country via PETS has increased exponentially. Dogs Trust has conducted 5 investigations which have exposed smugglers using PETS as a cover to illegally import dogs into Great Britain for sale. In 2015, Dogs Trust set up the Puppy Pilot, through which they fund the quarantine cost of illegally importing puppies seized at the border and then rehome them responsibly through their network of rehoming centres. Since 2015, more than 2,256 illegally imported puppies have been cared for by Dogs Trust through the Puppy Pilot, which, if sold to unsuspecting members of the public, would have made more than £3 million for the illegal importers. As many as 75 dogs coming through the Dogs Trust Puppy Pilot have had their ears cropped, despite this cruel mutilation being illegal in the UK and the EU. I'd like to thank... Yes,
I'm grateful to my old friend. She's making an interesting contribution, and I wonder whether she has any idea, having done some research, on to what extent ear cropping, which is already illegal in Britain, and we know it goes on still, to what extent there's enforcement of those regulations to try and crack down on ear cropping. It's all very well not bringing dogs in who have had their ears cropped, but what does my honourable friend discover is happening to enforce the current law?
My honourable friend makes a really important point, and to come back to the contribution made earlier by my honourable friend from Greenwich, enforcement is something that the government needs to commit to if it's prepared to accept this important piece of legislation to tackle something as serious as ear cropping. So I would like to thank the Dog Trust and other animal welfare charities such as Cat Protection and the RSPCA for the important work they carry out to help and support the well-being of our beloved animals. And talking of the RSPCA, I thought I would take the opportunity, as it hasn't been taken many times during this session of Parliament, to actually talk about ferrets a little more. Because obviously, with the exception of the Right Honourable Learned Lady for Banbury, I don't think we've talked about ferrets in this place at all, maybe talking more likely about reverse ferrets than actual ferrets. So I'm grateful to the RSPCA for their fun fact sheet on ferrets, to which I'm going to refer, because I've learned a great deal about ferrets since researching this particular debate. Apparently, ferrets it's Mustela pastorius furo, which translates as stinky, raging thief, and is a close ancestor to the European polecat, and because of their charming and cheeky characters, have become popular pets. So there's a number of characteristics for ferrets which the RSPCA draws out. Ferrets enjoy exploring and are very curious. They are obviously predators, I think a characteristic for which they are more widely known, but they're also very sociable, which I think is probably why they've risen in popularity as a pet. They're playful, and they also like sleeping. Apparently they can sleep between 18 and 20 hours a day, which is quite a feat. Ferrets use a range of methods to communicate. They use smell to hunt. And they're also very vocal, which made me think in a particularly vocal debate about how they communicate. So an excited ferret will make a dook noise, which is also called chuckling. And they can also produce a bark-like sound and sometimes do this if they're afraid. Continuous screaming is an indication of being highly alert in the presence of danger. So ferrets are flexible, colourful and can catch cold. They sound to me to be a fascinating animal, and I'm so pleased that the Honourable Lady's debate covers ferrets as well. Yeah. But back to the bill. I would like to address and welcome some of the aspects of the bill today. I welcome the fact that it will ban the import of puppies and kittens under 6 months and dogs and cats that are heavily mutilated or heavily pregnant. It will also address the current abuse of non-commercial rules that compromise animal welfare and biosecurity by making it more difficult and less profitable for traders to fraudulently import animals for sale under the disguise of owners travelling with their own pets. At its core, this bill seeks to establish comprehensive regulations and standards for the importation process of dogs, cats and ferrets by implementing stringent health checks, vaccination requirements and documentation procedures. We can effectively safeguard against the spread of diseases and prevent the introduction of infectious agents into our communities. These measures are essential not only for the protection of the imported animals, but also for the welfare of domestic animals and the public at large. Furthermore, the bill advocates for the humane treatment of animals throughout their journey. From the moment they leave their country of origin to their arrival at their destination, these animals deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. We must ensure that they are transported in safe and comfortable conditions, free from stress, fear and unnecessary suffering. Additionally, it seeks to combat the cruel practices associated with the illegal trade of dogs, cats and ferrets by cracking down on unscrupulous breeders and traders who exploit these animals for profit. We can protect vulnerable species from exploitation and abuse. The bill also goes further on the importance of responsible pet ownership. Owning a dog, cat or ferret is not merely a privilege, it's a responsibility that requires commitment, care and compassion. So on behalf of my constituents in Chester and the many animal lovers across the country, I would once again like to congratulate the Honourable Member for this important and long overdue bill.
Dr. Thérèse Coffey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a huge pleasure to speak in this debate, and I congratulate my honourable friend on bringing forward this legislation. I think just looking at the text of the legislation, honourable members can see quite how complicated this is to amend a variety of bits of law on something that you would hope would be rather straightforward. But the reason why we've got to this place is frankly due to criminals abusing the current rules that we have in place and have been smuggling dogs and cats and ferrets over, such to the point that I think in Dover alone there were over 500 instances of non-compliance found just in 2023. So in terms of the concerns that people have, it is right that we update the law, and I think this single issue bill has been the right way to make that happen. I'm also conscious during the debate over the Kept Animals Bill there was understandably considerable concern about mutilation. I'm pleased that this bill addresses that. As has already been said by the Honourable Lady, it's from Garston and Garston, I'll just leave it there, where I used to live at one point. But in terms of that's already against the law in this country, and too often people again have tried to say, oh well, the dog came from abroad and trying to get round the law. So it's important that we address those specific issues. In terms of, I know there have been some concerns about the number of pets to be brought over and what would be considered a non-commercial arrangement. For what it's worth, I think a sensible compromise has been reached. I wonder if the Minister might be able to just simply address in question, a question on 441A. It's 5, you can bring if they're in a car, and only 3 in any other form of transport. And I just wondered what was the situation, say somebody coming on the train with Eurostar, not in a car. I think it's covered if it goes to Eurotunnel. And if I'm sure if the Minister wants to think about that further, I might not need an answer today, but I think it's just worthy of consideration. In terms of other aspects about making sure that this works across the United Kingdom, it's important that we have seen the ability to give powers to ministers and devolved administrations. In terms of other aspects of the legislation, I think one of the things that I would like to probe further in this bill's process, and I hope it makes rapid process, is I'm very conscious about the different times of different clauses coming into effect. So it's good to see 1, 2, 3 and 7 come into effect straight away on royal assent. It would be useful to understand a little bit more on why clauses 4, 5 and 6 are going to take a bit longer. Then I appreciate there might be a transition, but at the moment it says 6 months. But I guess the thing most important of all is that I think that we do need to go further in committee and report stage so that a deadline is put on the introduction of the regulations, certainly as far as the powers of UK ministers can do. At the moment, it gives a power to do regulation. I think it's better, especially when we're trying to take this legislation through the private members' bill results, to give ourselves a fixed deadline of when we will get the regulations done. To that end, I'm very conscious, due to other primary legislation, consultation often has to happen on regulations. And we know that can take some time. So I'd be grateful to hear if the Minister has already started preparing regulations to bring Clause 1 into effect. Very good point in the bill, though, to make sure that the first regulations have to be about this specific issue of the smuggling, and I welcome that. So I'm conscious, Mr Deputy Speaker, that there are plenty of people who would like to speak today. I know that this bill will be well welcomed by many pet owners who believe they're doing the right thing. I'm conscious there are a lot of people who have a conscience, or if that's what they feel, they'll often see animals when they're abroad on holiday, try and bring them back. It's not always very wise. People have to be careful about the sorts of diseases that can be brought into the country, especially for feral animals that are there. And of course, people don't want to see, we are well known around the world for our love of animals, do not like to see the distress that these animals are often in and just abandoned. But I would encourage people who are considering taking on a pet to go to one of our brilliant charities to try and give many animals a second home. I can say from personal experience, it can be very positive. It could also be a bit of a nightmare dealing with some of the behavioural elements, which it can be a bit challenging later in life to correct. But one of the things is that you always know a rescue cat, a rescue pet, I've never experienced a rescue ferret, but they will love you forever. And I think that is absolutely vital part of animal welfare, to make sure that they are going to good homes, they're not in the hands of criminals, and this bill will address a really important loopholes that exist today. Thank you.
Ashley Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to speak in support of this bill and in support of better health and welfare standards in our dog, cat and ferret import industry. May I begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for North Devon for securing today's debate. I admire the work she's done to tighten our importation regulations and advance animal welfare standards for some of our most loved pets. With the current absence of any government legislation to bring forward some of the measures in this bill, the Honourable Member's work is even more important. I believe many of my constituents and many people in the country more broadly will be heartened by her dedication to improving the welfare of our imported pets. And with National Pet Day on the 11th of April fast approaching, this is also a timely debate to be having. National Pet Day celebrates the contribution of pets to our lives and highlights the care and welfare requirements of our animals. Just a week before, on April the 2nd, National Ferret Day will be marked, celebrating the estimated 100,000 pet ferrets in the UK. Absolutely. And in August, the contributions of both cats and dogs make to our lives will be celebrated on their namesake days, the 8th and 26th of the month, respectively. And so this shows me and proves that we are a nation of animal lovers, and one which holds particular affection for cats and dogs. I'm sure, like many other members of the House, I grew up with dogs, mainly Lancashire heelers, which sadly are a dying breed, but nevertheless a wonderful breed that are particularly special to my constituency in West Lancashire, where we have two kinds, the Lancashire heeler and the Ormskirk heeler. We had Scamp, who was a vicious little beast, but loved nevertheless. And then Pal, Beauty, Becky 1, sadly Becky 2, Tilly, Tiny and Pippin. And, you know, everybody in the family was involved in naming those dogs, and they were very much a part of our family life growing up. And as an adult, we've always had cats. And unfortunately, we most recently lost Colin to a congenital heart disease. Research from the World Population Review this year revealed the United Kingdom as home to about 12 million dogs, the 6th largest population of dogs in the world. And research from various organisations, including the PDSA, puts the number of UK households home to a dog at between 29 and 31%, which is huge. As of 2023, the number of owned cats is almost as high as dog ownership, with 11 million cats across the United Kingdom. And to the many people across this country with either a dog, cat or ferret, these animals are not just pets, but valued members of our families. And for others, a dog or cat can offer the much-needed companionship they may otherwise not have. We saw this social and personal benefit of animal ownership throughout the pandemic. 3.2 million pets were purchased during the periods of lockdown that we experienced. Lacking social interaction and instead facing social isolation, individuals and families alike sought the great companionship that pets can provide. With this nation's love and affection for our feline and canine friends in mind, I believe the provisions of this bill will be welcomed by many of our constituents. To understand the importance of this bill, it is essential to understand the current issues around puppy, kitten and ferret smuggling. And currently, these animals can enter this country in two primary ways, under the non-commercial pet travel scheme rules or via the commercial importation regime. Pet travel rules have made travelling with pets both cheaper and easier for owners. However, these non-commercial rules have been abused by puppy and kitten smugglers, particularly who care not for the health and welfare of these animals, but only for the financial reward from this exploitative practice. Traders have fraudulently claimed pet ownership of numerous puppies and kittens to import these animals under the non-commercial rules of the pet travel scheme. Yet, upon importation, these puppies and kittens have been commercially sold. Requirements for owners travelling with a pet are less stringent than those for commercial import, and rightly so. That is perfectly understandable. But therefore, smugglers have sought to abuse the pet travel importation route to circumvent more stringent health regulations for their animals. And it is the health and welfare of puppies, kittens and ferrets that is frequently compromised when these pets are illegally smuggled into the United Kingdom. As suggested, when I outlined the sheer number of these pets in this country, the demand for cats and dogs is extremely high. The demand for young puppies and kittens from high-value breeds is similarly high, as is, sadly, the demand for animals with certain mutilations. Cropped-eared dogs, declawed cats are both in demand, despite the illegality of both mutilations in this country. The sheer demand for dogs and cats of all types, coupled with the demand for dogs and cats with illegal mutilations under UK law, has encouraged the abuse of our animal importation rules. With less stringent regulation, pet importation has been feigned and the health and welfare of imported animals has suffered. In 2021, almost 1,000 dogs and cats were detained for being non-compliant with existing animal health and welfare legislation. And this is just the number of identified imported animals. As with any illicit industry, the true figure could be well higher, far higher. It is with these issues in mind that I welcome the provisions of this bill, which will offer far greater protection for the health and welfare of dog, cats and ferrets imported into this country. The measures outlined are, to me, eminently sensible. To address the abuse of non-commercial importation rules, it is my understanding that this bill will reduce the number of animals that can travel under the non-commercial rules from 5 per person to 5 per vehicle or 3 per foot or air passenger. Right now, smugglers are benefiting from non-commercial pet importation rules. So reducing the number any one person can claim as a pet when travelling can impinge further upon the fraudulent use of this importation route and the associated health and welfare costs associated by puppy smuggling under this system. More broadly, the provisions of this bill will place higher health and welfare standards for puppies and kittens imported. Banning the import of puppies and kittens under 6 months of age seems very reasonable, because separating either puppies or kittens from their mothers too early carries a risk of illness and even death for those young animals. We know that the separation of puppies from their mothers is not advisable at all before 8 weeks for exactly these reasons. In the United Kingdom, it is illegal for a licence holder to sell a puppy as a pet or to permanently separate it from its biological mother before 8 weeks. And for those who may choose to sell a litter from a family pet, there is a consensus amongst many welfare and veterinary organisations, such as the Animal Welfare Foundation, the Blue Cross, the PDSA and Dogs Trust, that puppies should not be separated until this age. The emotional and physical distress experienced for both can be immense, and if not fatal, it can have behavioural consequences on these animals throughout the duration of their life. Each week a puppy spends with its mother is crucial in the social and behavioural development of that dog. Bite inhibition and gentle play are taught in this environment and is essential before a puppy is then rehomed. The recognition of harm to kittens separated from their mothers at a young age is also already recognised in legislation. In this country, it is similarly illegal for a licensed breeder to sell a kitten under the age of 8 weeks of age. In recent months, this place has shown great concern around the possession of dangerous dogs who pose a risk to public health. Ensuring the suitable age of imported dogs and the welfare of these animals should therefore be an equally high priority in this House. To prevent the proliferation of a dangerous dog population in the United Kingdom, we need to prevent the importation of animals at a higher risk of displaying dangerous behavioural traits. This should therefore include the prohibition of young-age puppies without the behavioural maturity and bite inhibition that they learn from their mothers. And that's why the provision of this bill to ban the importation of puppies, kittens and ferrets under the age of 6 months can only be a positive step toward greater animal welfare standards and towards reducing our population of dangerous dogs that may pose a threat to public health.
I will, with pleasure.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank my honourable friend. She's making an excellent speech, very thoughtful and very well researched, I believe. Does she agree with me that there's a need for greater public information and education, as was mentioned by some honourable members previously in the debate, as part of to make a very effective contribution to reducing the risk of young-age puppies being sold?
I thank my honourable friend for his considered intervention, and I agree wholeheartedly that we do need to make sure that public information and education is improved. A lot of people don't understand the impact of taking a young puppy or kitten so early and what the implications can be. And very often they do this out of the goodness of their hearts and with the best intentions of wanting to look after a young puppy or kitten or get one for their children. But we do need to make sure that people are aware of the really long-term and often permanent damage that can be done to young puppies and kittens in this way. By removing the ability to import puppies and kittens under this age, we can likely remove that incentive for these animals to be stripped from their mothers at a critically young age, and thus reduce the numbers of puppies and kittens suffering from the health and welfare consequences of premature separation. Prohibition should also include dogs and cats, particularly who have been mutilated, which several other honourable members have talked about. And they have often suffered the trauma of unnecessary procedures like ear cropping and tail docking. These mutilations have no health benefits. They are abusive practices which are recognised in UK law as illegal. They only offer emotional and physical trauma to the animals they're inflicted upon. So preventing the importation of animals with these traumatic mutilations will also prevent the importation of animals who, as a result of the physical and emotional trauma caused by these mutilations, can develop behavioural changes. Dogs with cropped ears or their tails docked may also be recognised by certain members of the public as more aggressive or dangerous dogs. And we hear this regularly, I do in my surgery. And if people keep their own pets away from these animals, which they often do, for fear of aggression towards them or their dogs, those animals further suffer from a lack of socialisation and their behaviour further worsens. Similarly, the banning of imports of dogs and cats with mutilations will protect puppies and kittens from harmful practices and hopefully instigate a decline in demand for pets with certain physical characteristics. If it is illegal to import a puppy with cropped ears, it is common sense that the incentive to crop that puppy's ears at their location of origin is diminished. Because if they can't be imported and sold legally in the UK, that characteristic logically loses the value it once had to the importer. We may also hope that the criminalisation of certain mutilations will reduce demand for these practices from the consumer, along with the education that my honourable friend has already referred to. In this place, I frequently hear arguments that the criminalisation of any activity may increase the attractiveness to engage in whatever is being criminalised. But in the case of animal welfare, I don't find this argument particularly convincing. We are a nation of animal lovers. It is my belief that with the criminalisation of certain mutilations, those wanting to buy a puppy or kitten may understand further the harm associated with these practices and choose to shun these imported animals. Because we ban them because it is a mutilation and because it is damaging, not just because it is a fashion that we don't like. And for those whose conscience who doesn't prohibit them from acquiring a mutilated puppy or kitten, hopefully the potential recognition of their pet as illegal going forward might. We can hope that both the importer and the consumer will be disincentivised from mutilating and acquiring mutilated animals, respectively. The legal importation will all but disappear, and we may hope optimistically that the illegal smuggling trade will face several disruptions, with the broader recognition of the harm these mutilated animals have endured. I will.
In which is really making an excellent speech. But would she agree with me that many of us have learnt an awful lot about these practices as courtesy of the Honourable Member's Bill? But actually the wider public isn't really aware of some of those consequences, and the government really could do an awful lot more to inform the public of these practices and support the wider provisions of that bill.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I agree entirely. The wider public are not necessarily aware, and they're not necessarily aware of the wide range of legislation that currently exists. never mind the legislation that hopefully this bill, if it proceeds successfully, will bring in. So I think that by having this debate today, we're really helping to raise that awareness, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for bringing forward this bill to allow us to make that happen. Moving to the proposed banning of the import of heavily pregnant dogs and cats. This is a further provision that will help protect animal health and welfare. The plans of those seeking to circumnavigate new rules limiting the number of animals imported under non-commercial rules would be scuppered by this. Those seeking to abuse our laws will always try to find new ways to sustain their exploitative operations in any way they can. But this bill, well thought out as it is, offers two-layer protection for puppies and kittens. Imagine a scenario in which a puppy smuggler wanted to import several puppies or kittens, under the guise that these animals were their pets. The limit to the legal importation of these animals under non-commercial rules on an aeroplane would now be 3. So, cognizant of this limit, a smuggler could have sought to import a heavily pregnant dog or cat, who would then give birth in the UK to numerous puppies or kittens, which can then be sold. This practice would be limited, with the further provision banning the import of heavily pregnant dogs and cats. A puppy smuggler could not simply travel with a heavily pregnant dog under the guise of pet ownership for it to then give birth as a commercial opportunity here in the UK. But crucially, it's also going to support the health and welfare of pregnant cats and dogs, who are our pets, who can suffer greatly from international travel when heavily pregnant. Because of the physical and emotional upheaval of long-haul travel, it can prompt early labour without the necessary veterinary care, and therefore carries risks of harm or death for both the mother and puppies or kittens involved. When reviewing the specifics of the Honourable Member for North Devon's bill in preparation for today, I was frankly astonished that some of the provisions in this bill were not already enshrined in legislation. They are sensible and considered measures for which I can see little downside, and they are also well supported by others outside of this place. I believe the support this bill has garnered from animal welfare stakeholders and charities demonstrates the benefit the provision in this legislation could have on the health and welfare of puppies and kittens in the UK. The RSPCA, Dogs Trust and Battersea Dogs Home all support the measures in this bill, and they supported them when it was introduced in the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill. These stakeholders are the experts in this field, and therefore their endorsement has acted to reassure me that these measures are well considered and likely to positively impact the health and welfare of cats and dogs. In fact, the importance of supporting this bill has grown greater since the government abandoned its Kept Animals Bill in May 2023. The Prime Minister wrote back on the commitment he made during his ill-fated leadership election, in which he pledged to retain the Kept Animals Bill in the government's legislative agenda. It was left to those of us on these benches to try and revive the bill in an Opposition Day debate secured in June last year. As I have today, I spoke then on the 21st of June in defence of the greater regulation to ensure the welfare of animals imported into this country. Despite voting in favour of Labour's motion, members of Parliament on the benches opposite did reject our best attempts to revive the bill. I've since spoken in this place to press the government on their failure to support better animal welfare standards. In January, at the Livestock Exports Bill, I pressed the Minister on the government's plans on puppy smuggling and ear cropping legislation. However, as the title of the bill suggested, the government was concerned not with the importation of domestic pets, but on the exports of livestock at that stage. And the absence of legislation in this area is exactly why I was keen today to speak in support of this bill. I will.
Give way. The banning of live exports is one of the real benefits of our leaving the European Union.
Yes.
Were we to have stayed in the European Union, we would not have been able to give that benefit to our livestock. Does she not agree with me that that's a real benefit to animals in this country?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I think what I'm saying is that it was unfortunate that even at that point we still hadn't managed to bring anything forward around the importation of pets, and it was disappointing that the Kept Animals Bill was abandoned. We were told in this House that the government expected such measures to come forward through private members' bills, which is why I wholeheartedly congratulate the Honourable Member for North Devon for bringing forward. I'm delighted to see that what I considered to be something for the birds at the time has come true, and I'm delighted on this occasion to be wrong. If the moral argument for this bill, such as the greater protections for the health and welfare of domestic animals, is not compelling enough to the members across this House, the biosecurity threat posed by a poorly regulated and exploited importation industry should be. This is of particular relevance to my constituents in West Lancashire, which is also a farming community, and so we rely significantly on biosecurity. Puppies, kittens and ferrets imported into the UK illegally pose a significant risk of parasitic disease. The Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee took oral evidence in their puppy smuggling inquiry in October 2019. But the written evidence submitted to the inquiry and published for all members of this House to read was particularly interesting. Dogs and puppies illegally landed in the UK were recognised as presenting a significant biosecurity risk to the UK. The pet travel scheme requires microchipping, rabies vaccination, a mandatory pre-travel waiting period and, depending on the country from which the pet is travelling, tapeworm treatment and a rabies antibody test result to create that pet passport. The commercial importation scheme has, as I referenced earlier, greater requirements with all the conditions of the pet travel scheme alongside pre-important veterinary examination and an animal health certificate, and a pre-notification to the authorities so that we can ensure welfare during transportation. The illegal smuggling of pets, where there is not compliance with PTS standards or commercial importation standards, leaves our residents, pets, animals and us at risk of infectious diseases, which may spread to other animals or indeed, in some cases, people in the UK. I will.
Point? I'm very grateful to her, and she's making some points that others haven't made, and it's a very valuable contribution. Could she say anything about the fact that animals coming in that perhaps haven't had those vaccinations or aren't properly certificated as such can cause real devastation in farming communities like hers, because the diseases that they carry don't necessarily stick to the individual species which they come in attached to, and so therefore it can be a real issue for an entire community. Exactly. And its enforcement of these issues is the absolute key. It's all very well having a law, but enforcement is the absolute key to stop these problems arising.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention and her recognition of just how important this is in farming communities like mine. It is absolutely crucial. And, you know, we have legislation in place, some of which many farmers find quite onerous in terms of what they have to do to protect the biosecurity of their own livestock, of their own land. It's particularly relevant, actually, in my constituency, where we have the wetlands and the bird sanctuaries. I've completely forgotten the name of the place, standing on my feet. But it's really important, and you know, it's really difficult to put in place some of the protections. I've had long discussions with, particularly chicken and wildfowl breeders in West Lancashire about the things that they have to do in order to protect the biosecurity of our nation. And we need to ensure that the awareness and the legislation continues right through. Because obviously parasitic infections bear no, they don't take any notice of borders. I will, absolutely.
I just wanted to clarify, as I said in my own speech, that this particular matter is not covered by this particular bill, and that the British Veterinary Association are quite comfortable that it's not fully included, and that the EFRA Committee are continuing their work in this area.
I thank the honourable member for that clarification, and it is most welcome. The provision of this bill to both reduce the number of animals that can be claimed as personal pets and therefore imported under the Pet Travel Scheme regulations will help address this biosecurity risk, however. And a reduction in the number of puppies, kittens and ferrets admitted to just 3 will help reduce the numbers a smuggler can import under these less stringent biosecurity rules. Article 5A of the bill should further help limit abuse of the pet travel scheme. Under this article, the movement of a cat, dog or ferret would not classify as non-commercial unless the animal were accompanied by their owner or unless the movement occurred within 5 days of their owner arriving in the country. This change to legislation would help prevent abuse of the non-commercial importation regulations and limit this awful feigning of commercial animals as pets to circumvent the requirements of commercial imports. Alongside this reduction, I understand that this legislation would also place emphasis on greater enforcement mechanisms, and that's something that we've talked about at length. I'd welcome any further detail the member for North Devon could provide in this area to make sure that the sensible and worthwhile legislation that is brought forward, hopefully, is able to be enforced. After having looked at this bill with great interest and having considered the specifics of each measure carefully, I'm proud to support the honourable member for North Devon in the passage of this bill. I, along with many millions in this country, hold our pets in the highest regard. They make the lives of families and individuals up and down the country fuller and brighter. It is with the societal benefit of cats, dogs and ferrets and their welfare and health in mind that I am proud to support this bill. Its measures will protect the welfare of our domestic animal imports and protect our animals and public health here at home. I'm also supporting this because, as I spoke earlier, we sadly lost our cat, Colin, just after we'd moved house to a congenital heart disease. And we are looking forward to getting a new cat, yet to be unnamed, and hopefully a new dog, which I am insisting will be called Kenneth. And we're looking forward to doing that. And so it's really important to me that legislation is in place to ensure that anybody buying a new cat, dog or ferret as a member of their family can be reassured that it's been treated properly. But after my honourable friend from Chester's contribution, I'm seriously considering also getting a ferret, which my father's always wanted one. Once again, I thank and congratulate the member for North Devon for picking up what the government hitherto refused to advance. This is a necessary, important and common sense piece of legislation that I would urge all members of this House present today to support. Thank you.
Yeah. Heather Wheeler. Yeah.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a joy to follow that incredible speech. Thank you for calling me Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, on bringing forward this bill. It not only helps this government to continue fulfilling the commitments made on animal welfare in the Conservative manifesto, an area of great concern for a vast number of my constituents in South Derbyshire. Crucially, it directly and effectively legislates against those who may attempt to illegally smuggle puppies, kittens and ferrets across our border. This, I'm sure, is a sentiment that all my colleagues across the House can support and want to get on with. I have received many letters from constituents in South Derbyshire about this bill, all asking me to pledge my support, and this I submit to do on the record now. This illegal trade is appalling. The puppy trade in the UK, as has been noted, is valued at £3 billion, somewhere around 2 million puppies being sold annually. Phenomenal number. These numbers are staggering. And when one considers that as much as 50% of this trade is illegal or unlicensed, the enormity of this issue can really be brought into focus. In any industry or trade where the numbers and profit margins have the potential to be as large as they are, as that we can always predict that there will be a degree of exploitation. However, on an issue such as this, which involves the welfare and treatment of puppies and kittens and ferrets, in some cases barely weeks old, it is incredibly important that we act, and again, I commend my honourable friend for bringing this issue to the floor. The criminals who perpetrate this trade are motivated purely by greed. In most cases, these poor animals are either pregnant or newly born and are kept in conditions of squalor and filth until they are then subjected to the cramped conditions of their smuggling. They are subsequently sold to unsuspecting owners who are without any knowledge of the hardship of their new pet has undergone. I've taken a large chunk of my speech out, Madam Deputy Speaker, to make sure my colleagues can get in. Towards the end of last year, I visited Daisybrook Boarding Kennel in my constituency. The owners of this business frequently, legally transfer pets from the UK and Europe across our border and have had plenty of run-ins with those who smuggle puppies and kittens illegally. They told me that the lack of regard these smugglers have for the animals they are smuggling is staggering. These young puppies are nothing more than future profit, and any thoughts of the welfare of these animals are non-existent. This bill is crucial to restricting the ability of smugglers, and it will prove yet again that we are a government for which the welfare of animals is a top priority. We left the EU so that we could make our own decisions on these issues. Sorry, yes, of course.
To her giving way. She's obviously very passionate about this issue. I wonder if she has any thoughts about enforcement, because I think there's a widespread support for the measures in the bill around the House, but the issue of enforcement is absolutely key to making sure we really do stamp out the puppy smuggling trade.
Thank you very much. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I know that the Minister will reply fully later on. And he's nodding his head as I say that. The stipulations in this bill are clear and effective. It will ban the import of puppies and kittens and ferrets under the age of 6 months, ensuring they are not taken from their mothers too young, but also, crucially, that they are old enough to safely travel, potentially long distances. It will ban the import of heavily pregnant dogs and cats and ferrets, which the same concerns apply. It will ban the importation of dogs and cats that have been mutilated by having their tails docked or ears cropped, or in the case of cats, declawed, all of which are extremely painful procedures for the animals. And perhaps most crucially, it will reduce the number of animals that can travel under the non-commercial rules from five in the vehicle to 3, closing a loophole currently being exploited by many unscrupulous traders. I'm nearly finishing, Madam Deputy Speaker. This bill will significantly disrupt the methods of pet smugglers and their activity, and will help prevent low animal welfare breeding operations supplying Great Britain, the Great Britain pet market. This bill should help to provide owners with reassurances that the dogs, cats and ferrets they are buying and allowing into their families have not been sourced illegally nor treated inhumanely, and that is undoubtedly a good thing to be celebrated. But what is crucial in this bill is that the suffering of these poor animals is removed and never allowed to be turned into a profit by those who are breaking the law. This situation is a tragic one, and I fully commend this bill to the House. I hope all my colleagues on all sides of the House are willing to do the same. If we wish to maintain our position as a leader on animal welfare, something on which we pride ourselves, it is crucial that this bill becomes law as soon as possible. I again thank my honourable friend from North Devon for bringing it, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me so early. Much appreciated.
Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Animal welfare is a top priority for my constituents in Wakefield, and I regularly get hundreds of emails a month from concerned residents who want to see action on a raft of animal welfare issues, from puppy smuggling to cat declawing and animal testing. And as a husband of a veterinary surgeon, I completely concur with my constituents on the importance of this hugely significant policy area. And it would be, of course, remiss of me not to mention my own pet cat, Frank, and the unfortunate passing, very lately, I'm afraid, of my cat Smudge and my dog Roger. But I fully concur with the member from North Devon that these pets are indeed part of our family and are missed as much. And I'm sure Mr. Speaker will also concur with that, though I don't know if Madam Deputy Speaker has met Attley yet. I've yet to meet Attley the cat, but I hope to do so at some point in time. Many of my constituents have also written to me specifically about the abhorrent practice of ear cropping, which I want to touch on briefly. As colleagues may know, in 2022, the RSPCA recorded a horrifying 621% increase in the number of dog ear cropping reports they received over the previous 5 years. Of course, ear cropping has been illegal in this country since 2006. The last Labour government made sure of that, and I'll get on to Labour's animal welfare achievements shortly. But the RSPCA have real concerns that an increasing number of dogs are being sent abroad for ear cropping to circumvent UK law. Let's be clear, there is absolutely no evidence that ear cropping is necessary or has any medical benefits for dogs. And innocent dogs' ears are clipped, often simply because the owner wants their dog to look scarier for cosmetic reasons. Most horrifyingly of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, is far too often the procedure is carried out by amateurs with basic DIY tools and no anaesthetic for the dog. We must be clear that ear cropping is very simply mutilation. It is cruelty. Can I also just commend my honourable friend for the City of Chester for her very interesting insight into the world of ferrets. Very interesting indeed, though just to approach the inevitable question from my family when I return home, no, we cannot have a ferret. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am immensely pleased to see such an important bill receiving parliamentary time. And I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for North Devon for all of her hard work in securing and bringing this bill forward. She is a powerful campaigner on ecological and environmental issues and animal welfare, and I have immense respect for her. But I have to say, it is a damning indictment of just how far this Conservative government have given up on governing. They have their own MPs legislating from the backbenches via private member bills because ministers refused to pass an equivalent bill in government time. The Tories repeatedly promised to progress the Kept Animals Bill but failed to do so, abandoning ship after 2 second readings, despite it supposedly being a key manifesto priority for the benches opposite. Colleagues may recall that Labour attempted to revive the bill last year. How foolish we were to assume that just because it was in the Tory manifesto, promised repeatedly during the last election and by Tory ministers countless times since, that it'd actually stick to their word. So, while I'm glad the government seemed to be content with this bill progressing, it does seem bizarre that they're having to be reminded of a key plank of their own manifesto from one of their own MPs. As my honourable friend, the Shadow Environment Secretary and member for Croydon North said previously, it's plain as day that the Conservatives have simply bottled it. In contrast to this Tory government, I'm immensely proud, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the contribution that the previous Labour government made to animal welfare. In 1997, Labour banned the practice of experimenting on great apes and also introduced a ban on testing cosmetics on animals, extended to include cosmetic ingredients in 1998. In 2000, Labour passed the groundbreaking Fur Farming Prohibition Act.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I certainly will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend giving way on that point, because it was my private member's bill that led to that legislation. And although it was talked out, at report by opposition MPs who didn't like the word prohibition, Nonetheless, it was then adopted by the government and taken into legislation. And so it's a very good thing. And this led to a European-wide ban on fur farming.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and thank her for all the work and efforts that she made in making that possible. In 2004, I'll go on to say that Labour were the party that passed the Hunting Act, which banned the hunting with dogs of foxes, deers, hares and mink. We banned the use of drift nets in fishing, freeing dolphins, seabirds and other sea creatures from painful, cruel ensnarement. And in 2006, Labour's Animal Welfare Act for the first time saw animal owners responsible for ensuring the welfare needs of their animals were met. Labour has a proud animal welfare legacy, and it is a privilege to represent a constituency that continues to take these issues so very seriously. On to the bill at hand. The Honourable Member for North Devon's bill will finally make provision for restrictions on live importation of dogs, cats and ferrets, as originally attempted in the failed Kept Animals Bill. And I'm pleased that the bill has the support among many others, including Pets at Home and Vets for Pets, whom who've long supported action on this issue and who I've recently visited. The conditions on the importation that this bill sets out are vital for efforts to continue driving up animal welfare standards in the UK. The bill's banning of importation of kittens and puppies under 6 months of age and dogs or cats which are more than 42 days pregnant or which have been mutilated by ear cropping, declawing or tail docking are welcome provisions and will bring a wave of relief to my constituents in Wakefield who care so passionately about this issue. To touch briefly on cat smuggling in particular, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased that this bill has also the support of Cats Protection. Their research found that a huge 50,000 cats were obtained overseas in 2022 to 2023. And without stronger restrictions on import conditions, there is very little we can do to ensure these cats get the veterinary treatment they need for legal entry into this country. Without stronger laws, there's also very little we can do to ensure that a cat's travel conditions or point of origin were not traumatic, which is so often the case. Stress from long journeys is well documented, as my husband has attested that this causes cats a great deal of stress and painful cystitis. So it's really a critical matter of animal welfare that we get this right. I therefore welcome in particular the provisions for regulation on the number of cats and dogs and ferrets that can be imported at a time per vehicle or per foot passenger before it is deemed a commercial import. This is a vital part of the bill, which will go some way against the scourge of puppy and kitten smuggling and against animal mutilation, both of which blights our animal welfare reputation and actively harms the welfare of hundreds of animals every year. Madam Deputy Speaker, I really do welcome this bill, and I sincerely hope that the Government provides the parliamentary time for its progression. Thank you.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real privilege and honour to speak in this vital debate. First of all, I declare my strong personal and professional interest as a veterinary surgeon and as a fellow of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. I strongly support this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've had to frantically rewrite the introduction to my speech when I've heard my colleagues name-check their pets. My two lovely dogs, Poppy and Juno, I know are following this debate closely, and I have now had to name-check them. They would never forgive me if I didn't, and I'm sure that they will probably punish me by rolling in something completely unspeakable. We are indeed a nation of animal lovers, Madam Deputy Speaker. They provide us with so much companionship and help our physical and mental well-being. Can I commend my friend and colleague, the Honourable Member for North Devon, for driving forward this important legislation, and for colleagues across the House supporting it today and supporting this important area of legislation for many years. Can I also commend many charities and institutions and organisations, the British Veterinary Association, the Dogs Trust, and specifically I'd like to mention Paula Boyden, the Veterinary Director of the Dogs Trust, who's done so much work on this. Cats Protection, Blue Cross, Battersea, RSPCA, Four Paws, Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, and the veterinary surgeon Mark Abraham have done so much on this issue. Our Select Committee, the EFRA Select Committee, have taken a close interest in this area for many years, and we've run various inquiries in recent years, the movement of animals across borders, and we have a current inquiry on pet welfare and abuse that's raising a lot of the issues that we are discussing today. We had an emergency special session this week on issues facing the veterinary sector, and we looked at issues facing biosecurity and animal welfare as well. I welcome that this bill is about dogs, cats and ferrets. That's so important that we're encompassing all these animals. I welcome that this bill will strongly put in legislation that we are increasing the age of importation to a minimum of 6 months. Now, I note that some measures are not in the bill, but we want to get this legislation on the statute books as soon as possible. But I very much hope that the government moving forward will be able to bring in secondary legislation to amend, to add things as and when things need to be done. We need to keep the option open for future secondary legislation. Things like reinstating the rabies teeter checks, things like increasing the wait time post-rabies vaccination to 12 weeks. These will actually help reinforce the increasing of the age to 6 months. I hugely welcome the change on heavily pregnant animals. On the EFRA Select Committee over the last few years, we've taken harrowing evidence of the awful trade in animals being shipped into this country, heavily pregnant, to then give birth in this country and then being shipped back out again, to and fro, sometimes with fresh suture wounds coming in. It's been awful and harrowing to hear some of that evidence. The Dogs Trust since 2019 has taken in 168 pregnant dogs that have been transported. Now, currently, it is banned to transport dogs and cats in the last 10% of pregnancy, and that's very difficult to assess when that is. So I think bringing this ban in to now include the last third of pregnancy is a very, very important step. I think we also need to keep a watching brief in the future as well to see whether unscrupulous traders are actually flipping between non-commercial and commercial movement of animals. So we need to look at whether we need to act on the commercial importation of pregnant animals as well. We have taken evidence that there are bad people out there that are actually shipping animals in, and what has happened over recent years is that these unscrupulous traders are switching between commercial and non-commercial, and then when the authorities are moving one way, they are moving the other. So we need to keep a watching brief on this moving forward. I welcome Clause 4, that it is not non-commercial if there are more than 5 animals per vehicle. That is so important. I know that many institutions and charities wanted that to be 3 per vehicle, but I can tell you that 5 per vehicle is an awful lot better than 20 per vehicle, because what people were doing was picking up passengers and saying, well, these passengers on board, these pets are with them. And so bringing this rule in that it's 5 per vehicle will be an absolute game changer in terms of that. It looks to me like Clause 5 allows ministers moving forward to bring in secondary legislation. Things like Clause 5 allow secondary legislation, and we do need to keep a watching brief on this. When previous laws have come in, these unscrupulous people will find loopholes that were not predicted by the legislators drawing them up. So we need to be able to act in the future to close these loopholes down. There's been a lot of discussion today about the mutilations of dogs and cats, and this bill will very much tackle that. To be clear, ear cropping is an absolutely horrific practice that has no role in civilised society. There is no medical or clinical benefit to the animal to having its ears cropped. As has been discussed, a lot of this is about how the dog looks, to make them look more formidable, more ferocious as well. There's been a real upsurge in the prevalence of dogs that have had their ears cropped. I'm sure when we're walking around, you do see these dogs now as well. And we have also, on our select committee, taken harrowing evidence that it is illegal in this country to crop a dog's ears, but we have evidence that it has been taken place in this country, people doing it in horrific circumstances, potentially in their back garden sheds. There are, if you look online, it is absolutely horrific. There are online ear cropping kits. We need to really stamp that out as well. Something that's very important that I think will help address this law will really close that loophole. We've got to have a look at popular culture as well. If you look at the popular animated films, one of my favourite films that I watched with my children was the Disney Pixar film Up, which we all absolutely love. But if you look really closely at the dogs in that film, many of them are cropped. And so if people are going to the cinema with their kids and seeing this on the big screen, that looks normal, and that is wrong.
Good point.
Equally so, in the last couple of years, there was another hugely successful animated film, the Super Pets film. Again, the lead character was an ear-cropped dog. Now, a lot of people then in our country, they love their animals, but they don't realise that that ear cropping is not normal. And so they want to have those dogs. And unfortunately, there is a popular culture, a celebrity culture as well. So we need to educate people that these dogs have been horrifically mutilated. So this law, when it comes in, will really close that loophole down. My honourable friend really raised the very important point about brachycephalic dogs as well, these dogs that have very short faces and have a real difficulty in breathing. And that is so important because people look at, they are lovely dogs, they're wonderful dogs, but these dogs have an awful lot of clinical difficulties as well. So we need to do a piece of work to make sure that in the breeding of these dogs in the future, their noses can become longer again, so that they will be able to breathe. But again, it's in popular culture, it's in advertising of products. You look at a lot of major products that are advertised, I'm not going to name them, but you will see brachycephalic dogs as the image, and we need to be very, very cautious about that.
If I could draw him back to his previous profession, do you think that the vets actually have a responsibility when it comes to seeing dogs that are unsuitable for breeding and actually facilitating the breeding process, instead saying, no, we're not letting this go forwards?
The honourable member for that intervention. The veterinary profession, I can give you a categorical reassurance, is really strongly looking at this issue very, very closely and has a role in terms of educating the pet-owning public about where to source their dogs responsibly and to make sure that these dogs have a good, happy life moving forward. But yes, the veterinary profession is looking at this very, very closely indeed. What we've also seen, and I think it comes into frame with these ear-cropped dogs, we've seen an upsurge in the last few years of unregulated canine fertility clinics, where acts of veterinary surgery are being taken place by people not qualified. And so we need to make sure moving forward that we actually strongly clamp down on those practices as well. I'm absolutely delighted that this bill includes cats, and so in terms of the mutilations, it includes those cats that have been horrifically declawed. Again, there is no benefit for the cat to be declawed. So this bill will help an awful lot of cats moving forward. I think also we need to look in the future as well whether there needs to be secondary legislation. We're going to be banning the import of ear-cropped dogs, but I think also we need to think about banning the onward sale of those dogs in this country as well. But hopefully this bill will stop the importation, and that may not be necessary, but we need, again, with this, to keep a watching brief. Now, many colleagues today have also talked about diseases as well, and so the importation of these animals does present a risk to animals in this country, but also people. One of the major diseases that we are very concerned about is canine brucellosis, caused by Brucella canis. In 2020 to 2022, there were 143 positive cases in dogs, and in 2023, 160 positive cases. And there have been 2 laboratory-confirmed cases in people. This is a disease that's a zoonosis that can be transmitted from dogs to people. So again, this bill, by banning the importation of heavily pregnant dogs, because one of the main exposures is when a pregnant dog comes into this country and whelps in this country. It's the birthing fluids that are potentially the risk in terms of people. So vets, nurses and practitioners in the front line are at risk, and owners as well. And as I've said, there have been 2 people in this country that have contracted this disease. Now, this is a really unpleasant disease for the dog. Treatment is not recommended. There's a poor prognosis, and so often euthanasia is recommended, and it's an unpleasant illness in people, and especially in people, vulnerable people, immunocompromised people. So I think it's a salient point that we need to be very cognizant that laws like this will help in terms of that, because we've seen an increase of dogs coming in that have diseases like this. Yeah.
He's making an excellent speech. I wonder, with his experience as a vet, to what extent he thinks that enforcement is an issue, because I think there's widespread support around the House for the provisions in the bill, but enforcement is key. Does he think that's getting better or worse?
I thank the Right Honourable Member for that intervention. Enforcement is absolutely pivotal. I was able to chair the EFRA Select Committee this week in the Chair's absence, and we had a special session on issues facing the veterinary sector, and we looked very closely at biosecurity, animal health and welfare, and looked at things like the Animal and Plant Health Agency. So being vigilant about diseases, monitoring them, and I'm going to touch on that later on in my speech about how we can do more in that area. In terms of the importation of dogs, as we've said, in the UK, people love their animals, and a lot of people think they're doing the right thing by importing these dogs and rescuing these dogs. So we've seen a real surge of dogs coming over from the continent of Europe, from Eastern Europe, Macedonia, etc. And some of these dogs have had diseases like brucellosis, leishmaniasis, and that's where we need to be careful. So I think people think they're doing the dogs a favour, and actually there have been unscrupulous people who are probably rounding up some of these street dogs and bringing them over, when actually that's not benefiting the dog in their own country. And what we need to remember, we have animal welfare charities in this country absolutely full of lovely dogs that need to be rehomed. So people in this country can do a better thing by seeking their dogs and their cats and their pets from those charities. Can I also, at that point, say a huge shout out and thank you to all those animal welfare charities and shelters that do so much to rescue these animals. We've seen a real upsurge in pet ownership through the pandemic. People talk about the pandemic puppies. People took on animals in different circumstances, and now a lot of people have gone back to work and they can't deal with these animals. A lot of these animals were not socialised. On our EFRA inquiry, we've seen a lot of increased behavioural issues, and the animal welfare charities are picking up the slack. So can I just pay tribute to them? They have a really important job, they have a stressful job, and we are very, very lucky to have them. So I urge moving forward that we keep the idea of vigilance in terms of biosecurity, and potentially think about introducing secondary legislation about pre-importation checks for dogs, so check them for Brucella canis coming in. We have now left the European Union, and in 2012 the EU stopped the mandatory treatment against ticks and tapeworms in some animals coming in. We have the opportunity now, we've left the European Union, to reinstate that mandatory treatment. To give you an illustration of how that could be important, Madam Deputy Speaker, just up the road from your constituency in Epping Forest is Harlow. So a few years ago there was a dog going for a walk in Harlow that ultimately picked up babesiosis. This dog had never been out of the country, so had picked up that disease from a tick in a field in Harlow in Essex. So obviously a dog had gone out of the country or come back in and hadn't been treated, dropped the tick, and a dog here got that disease. So that gives you that illustration. A simple change through secondary legislation could protect our dogs in this country. So I think that's something that we need to look at moving forward. Now, we've talked a lot about biosecurity, and we've mentioned today the Animal and Plant Health Agency. They do fantastic work keeping our country safe. They have had incredible threats in recent years. They've been tackling avian influenza. They are working closely on bovine tuberculosis. And now there is the increasing threat that I know my right honourable friend on the front bench is looking at very closely, the increasing threat of blue tongue as well. And as the mid-season comes, that's going to be something that puts everyone under pressure. So again, I pay tribute to those people in the front line that are trying to do so much to keep our nation's animal health and plant health safe, and indirectly human public health as well. So again, my right honourable friend on the front bench knows where I'm going with this. I urge the government, and we had the Chief Veterinary Officer in front of us in EFRA this week, again reaffirming the importance of upgrading, doing the full refurbishment of the APHA HQ in Weybridge. It needs a £2.8 billion refurbishment, which is a lot of money when you are financially constrained as a country. But that money needs to be spent because it will save a lot of heartache and a lot of money in the future. So very much I urge the government to move forward on that. We need to be prepared. Now we've left the European Union, there's been a lot of talk about enforcement and checks of animals coming in. Prior to leaving the EU, these animals were coming in with no checks at all. So we have a real opportunity now to strengthen our biosecurity. So there's now the border target operator model. Now, I know there's been a lot of questions raised about this, and our Select Committee is taking a very close interest on this. We've been down to Dover. We have an opportunity now to strengthen our biosecurity, and we've got to get it right, we've got to fund it right, and we've got to staff it properly. We need to make sure that these bad people, the unscrupulous people that are going to try and unpick this legislation and find loopholes, we need to let them know that there will be random checks on ports to make sure that if they are coming in on a weekend, if they are coming on a different day or coming in through a different port, they could be detected, because that will protect animal health and welfare in this country. Finally, I'm digressing a little bit, but we're talking a lot about animal health and welfare, and we've talked about crop dogs. One of the dogs that has had an awful lot of ear cropping is the XL bully dog, that now the government has brought forward, in my view, the necessary legislation to actually protect people and other animals from some of these dogs. Now, some of these dogs are fine, but some of these dogs are really very, very dangerous indeed. But I'm very appreciative of the government and the Secretary of State and ministers to listening to me, the BVA and the EFRA Select Committee in actually, and the veterinary profession, to extending the neutering deadline for these young dogs that are under 7 months at the end of January of this year. They've extended the neutering deadline to June 2025. Now that might seem a very small point, but that's an important point for these dogs, these exempted, registered XL bully dogs. There will be health benefits, because if you spay or castrate them too early, then they have clinical difficulties, and this will relieve pressure on the veterinary sector moving forward. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm really glad to welcome this legislation. The Conservative government has a very strong record on animal welfare. We've passed the Animal Sentience Act, we've instituted the Sentience Committee, we've introduced the Sentencing Act to increase sentencing for cruelty, introduced compulsory microchipping for cats, banning the keeping of primates as pets, and we've got bills coming in today, and we've got bills on pet theft and livestock worrying. We are a nation of animal lovers. We have the highest standards of animal welfare in the world. So with bills like this, we can be a beacon to the rest of the world. Animal welfare unites us in humanity, and it unites us across this House. I welcome this bill, and as a Member of Parliament and as a veterinary surgeon, it has my full support.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by thanking the member for North Devon for introducing this bill, and can I join, I think, everybody else who has spoken in this place in supporting this piece of legislation. People in Croydon love their pets. We are lucky enough to be one of the greenest London boroughs, which of course people will know, with some beautiful parks, and we have thousands of animal lovers and pets in our borough. During COVID, as has already been mentioned, there was a big increase
in the number of people who decided they wanted a cat or a dog, and we have seen a large increase in Croydon in the same way, and we need to make sure that when people are going to purchase, going to get a cat or a dog, or indeed a ferret, which we learnt much about from the member for Chester at the start of this debate, they need to know that these things will be done in the right way and that they're not buying something that's an animal that has been smuggled into the country illegally. Other members on this side have pointed to the record that the Labour government had when it came to animal welfare, and very honourable friend next to me who introduced legislation herself. I remember in 1997 I was working for a Labour MP at the time, and we didn't really use email back then, but we were introducing the banning of fox hunting, and we literally had hundreds of letters, handwritten letters that people had sent in who were absolutely desperate to see that end to fox hunting and testing on cosmetics, all the other legislation that was introduced under the last Labour government. And I also join with colleagues who have talked about their disappointment about the Kept Animals Bill, and that didn't come to pass, and we are now grateful to the Honourable Member for North Devon for bringing in some aspects which we can all support. I have had many constituents write in to ask me to support this bill, which other members have also had, such as Jan, who writes into me often and is a big supporter of cats protection, and she wrote in to say that their stats, the cats protection stats of 2023, said that 50,000 cats were obtained from an overseas source in the 12 months preceding the survey, and of course it is unclear what conditions those cats or kittens were subjected to during their travel. When I was the Shadow Secretary of State for Policing, I would talk to senior police officers up and down the country about crime in their area, and increasingly would hear from the police about the problem of smuggling of pets. I can remember being in the northeast talking to a senior police officer there who said that they had very serious, large criminal gangs who had a presence across multiple countries, and they would smuggle people, drugs, vapes and pets, and it was big business. And of course there was no enforcement or not much enforcement to stop this practice from happening. But equally, if people...
my honourable friend give way on that.
I will give way, yes.
I thank her very much, and I think she's making a very powerful case. And clearly, if you smuggle drugs or arms or whatever, the penalties if you get caught are severe. If you're smuggling kittens or puppies, the penalties are virtually non-existent, let alone the enforcement.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. If you are caught smuggling drugs or people, you face years in prison. From the information that I've looked at, if you're caught smuggling, if the police do a sting, which they do sometimes, it doesn't happen that often because they don't have the resources, but if they do manage to catch someone who's smuggling illegally into the country, you're looking at a couple of months imprisonment as a maximum. And so if you're a criminal gang, probably not even that. If you're a criminal gang managing risk, you are going to say, well, let's introduce these puppies, particularly given the cost of them can run into several thousands of pounds each. So it is a worthwhile crime, and we need to do more to get rid of it and to stamp down on it. And I do welcome the provisions in this bill, but I do think we need to look to go further in terms of enforcement and other measures, as other members have said. I just wanted to briefly touch on my journey trying to buy and getting a pet. During COVID, my children were pushing me to get a dog, and my husband was very against it, which I think is not uncommon in families. And finally, my children won the argument, and we decided to get a dog. I hadn't got an animal before, and I realised the whole situation was a bit of a minefield, because you go online, obviously that's the first thing you do, and there are hundreds of websites selling
pets, and you have no idea really where they've come from, what their quality of life has been so far, whether they've been brought in illegally or not. So Pets for Homes is a big one. Gumtree sells thousands of pets. Puppies.co.uk, foreverpuppy.co.uk. There are many different sites. And I went on and looked, and I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know how to avoid doing something I shouldn't. So I looked at some of the charities, and of course a lot of the charities provide really useful information about what to do and what not to do. And the Dogs Trust has particularly good information about what to avoid. So you need, for example, to make sure you can see good pictures of the animal with its mother. You need to be able to ring up the person that's selling it to you. You need to be able to have a conversation with them. You then need to go and see the animal. You need to make sure that the mother and the father is there. And you need to look at the surroundings, because sometimes you can pick up on something slightly dodgy, which happened to me several times. I reported several cases because you couldn't really see the mother of the animal. You couldn't see what the background was. The dog owner wasn't asking you any questions about your background, and it didn't feel right. And indeed, I went to visit some puppies in a flat, which I also reported because the flat was immaculate. There was no evidence really that someone was living there, but there was a crate of puppies and a man, and I just wasn't comfortable that actually it was what it should have been, and so I reported the situation. I will, yeah.
I don't know if my honourable friend is aware of the storyline that appeared in Coronation Street a couple of months ago on precisely this issue, with the indomitable Evelyn, who is of course played by Maureen Lipman. The storyline covered the issues around puppy farming and was a really strong and I'd say educational storyline in a very well watched and much loved soap opera that actually illustrated exactly the point that she's making.
I thank my honourable friend for that excellent intervention. Coronation Street does, and all of the soaps do quite a good job in helping educate us about some of these issues. And I had to go online, I had to look for that information, and I had to make sure I was making the right choices. What we ended up doing was finding somebody who had a rescue dog from Ukraine, and they brought the rescue dog over to this country and had realised that the dog was pregnant, but they hadn't known that at the time. And the dog only gave birth to one puppy, which is quite rare, and often means that the dog has had some maltreatment to get it to the point of only having one puppy. So we, in fact, adopted that puppy. So we have who was born in this country, but the mother was brought over from Ukraine. Lots of constituents have been in touch, and lots of members have already pointed to some of the statistics around this and why it's important that we take action. This is a multi-million-pound industry across countries, with UK sales of up to 2 million puppies annually, and a value of anything up to £2 billion. 50% of the industry is illegal or unlicensed, and as the illegal trade has changed, so has its production systems. We had many helpful briefings from many organisations as part of this debate, and a helpful briefing from Battersea told us that farms breeding puppies on an industrial scale are just as likely now to be found in urban tower blocks or warehouses in Eastern Europe as they are in ramshackle, shiveringly cold and filthy cages and sheds and shacks on repurposed small holdings. A Four Paws report on the illegal puppy trade in the UK found that over 30% of imported puppies were from Romania alone. And according to respondents to Cats Protection, Cats and Their Stats 2023 survey, 3% of the cats that were obtained in the 12 months preceding the survey were from abroad, which equates, as I said, to 50,000 cats, and it's unclear of their conditions. Puppies and kittens that are imported too young, as has been said, face a much higher risk of developing illness or suffering early deaths. And I should have congratulated the Honourable Member for Penrith and the Borders, who made an excellent speech before me and knows much more about this and the impact that these things can have on our animals. And I listened with great interest and learnt a lot during his speech. So raising the age minimum, I think, will allow animals to grow older and protect them a bit more from travelling long and stressful journeys, and would also be very welcome and stop a lot of the sale of those very young pets, which you do see online. It's very easy to find. There are multiple adverts of young puppies or kittens who are being advertised as 4, 5, 6 weeks old and ready for homing. Of course, puppy smuggling, as I've said, is an unchecked criminal activity. It causes suffering to animals and heartache and financial cost to their owners. It helps fund wider organised crime and prevents an evidenced disease transmission threat. My constituents in Croydon Central are very pleased with the member for introducing this legislation. We have talked a lot about enforcement and about the concerns that a piece of legislation is only as good as the enforcement that goes with it, and that the enforcement on existing laws and regulations is not adequate. So we do have significant questions about enforcement. But this is a step on the journey in the right direction, and I think on behalf of the dog and cat and ferret lovers in Croydon, I would welcome today's bill.
Jane Hunt.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and first I would like to start by giving many congratulations to my dear and good friend, the Honourable Member for North Devon, in bringing forward this excellent bill. I know from the hundreds of emails I receive every year on this subject that the residents of my Loughborough constituency are animal lovers and passionate about animal welfare. And in the tradition that we've seen to have formed this morning, I'm going to name the 3 dogs that I currently own. Lucky, who was a rescue dog, otherwise known as Lux the Patterjack on Instagram and has more followers than I do. Lulu, a retired guide dog and an absolutely most intelligent dog you've ever met. And Brooke, our adopted dog, who is possibly the most loving and placid of dogs, so much so that she continues to wag her tail whilst throwing up on the carpet. So as the proud owner of these 3 dogs, I share the views of my residents, and so I have welcomed the ambitious reforms the government has introduced since 2010, including mandatory microchipping of dogs and cats and the modernisation of the licensing system for dog breeding and pet sales, to name just 2. The low welfare movement of dogs, cats and ferrets from abroad to the UK by unscrupulous people seeking to maximise their profits at the expense of the animals is horrendous and must be stopped. Sadly, this trade is big business. According to a joint briefing I have received from Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, Cats Protection, Dogs Trust, Four Paws UK and the RSPCA, they say, and I quote, "The puppy trade has become a multi-million transnational industry with UK sales of up to 2 million puppies annually and a value of anything up to £3 billion. However, as much as 50% of this industry is either illegal or unlicensed and off the enforcement radar, and half of that originates from outside of the UK. More concerningly, animal smuggling itself is part of a much wider web of criminality, with the charities also confirming that within the trade, other criminality converges, including drug dealing, money laundering, and even people trafficking. I was therefore pleased to stand on a manifesto at the last election which had committed to cracking down on the illegal smuggling of animals, and welcomed that this commitment was repeated in the government's 2021 Action Plan for Animal Welfare. This bill will enact the government's commitment and restrict the movement of dogs, cats and ferrets into the UK on grounds of animal welfare. For example, if they are under 6 months old, are mutilated, such as those who have had their ears cropped, or are heavily pregnant. This is essential, as many of these animals are currently bred and reared in appalling conditions. This was highlighted by a number of my constituents who have raised the abhorrent practice of ear cropping. The RSPCA experience that shows this has also been done on puppies without any veterinary intervention or anaesthetic, which can result in long-term pain and trauma. Cutting a dog's ears can also harm their ability to communicate, meaning their social skills are impaired for life. After everything they've endured, a dog's behaviour can also be impacted. Rightly, the bill also addresses the issue of commercial imports being disguised as non-commercial movements, which currently allows breeders to avoid complying with the more stringent requirements which are in place for commercial imports. I am very pleased, having said that, though, that Clause 4 sets out the restrictions, and I'm grateful that the number of dogs allowed, as I occasionally take my dogs to France, where my mother lives. No one should be able to profit off the distress of animals, and combined, these reforms will go a long way to safeguard vulnerable animals and disrupt a supply chain which currently helps fund serious criminal activity. It will also cement the UK's position as having some of the highest welfare animal standards in the world. I welcome that the bill is not only being supported by the government, but also has the backing of a number of important welfare animal charities, including Dogs Trust, who I have had the pleasure of visiting in my own constituency. I would like to add my support and again thank my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, and Henry the dog, for bringing the bill forward and speaking so passionately on the issue.
Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in the debate today. And I do want to congratulate the Honourable Member for North Devon on bringing forward this very, very important bill. I also want to put on record that Feltham and Heston is a community of animal lovers, and animal welfare is one of the issues that is constantly prevalent in my inbox, as I'm sure it is for other colleagues. And constituency level polling shows that 2/3 of my constituents feel that animal welfare should be a priority for political parties. In particular, I'd like to also thank my constituents, Judith Ross, Brenda Pugh, Elaine Fogarty, Shirley O'Leary, Jackie Meads and many others for their consistent championing of animal rights. Now, the Honourable Member made a very strong case for necessary reform in support of animal health and welfare and the tackling of the exploitation of very vulnerable animals. And indeed, I think it's worth mentioning that changes introduced also by the last Labour government left an indelible mark on British history and have stood the test of time, from the bans on fox hunting and fur farming to the action taken to stop experimentation on great apes and the testing of cosmetics on animals. And I think it's there for the Labour Party, and I think colleagues across the House, that our belief in protecting animal welfare is a matter of principle and of conviction. Now, my constituents were rightly appalled that the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill 2019 manifesto commitment was shelved by the Conservative government, and that Conservative MPs also voted against Labour's plan, which I supported, to ensure that the bill had parliamentary time last June. But it is important that we're now having this debate, and I'm proud to have attended also the Dogs Trust event this week, sponsored by the Honourable Member as well, which highlighted their decade of work on ending puppy smuggling, and I do want to thank them also for all that they do. And whilst I do congratulate the Honourable Member for North Devon for bringing forward today's bill, which has clearly got cross-party support, it is puzzling to me that this important legislation has been the responsibility of backbenchers to be bringing forward. Well, it can hardly be said that we have a very crowded legislative agenda in the House at the moment, and there should be enough government time to necessitate this. And these issues have also been raised by the Environment Committee in 2016, 2019 and indeed 2021. And I would say that given this government has also been so enthusiastic to take advantage of Brexit bonuses, whether they relate to striking nurses or scrapping of consumer rights, or undermining environmental protections, it does beg a belief that it's taken so long to have proposals for much needed and uncontroversial tweaks to the EU pet travel scheme. So the bill will close very important loopholes in the pet travel rules, which apply to non-commercial movements in order to prevent that unscrupulous traders from exploiting our pet travel rules. Puppy and kitten smuggling, indeed the ferret smuggling, is a significant problem, and one that causes immense pain and distress, huge distress, to those animals affected. It's a widespread and horrifying practice, though, and in 2019, as I think has also been shared, the Dogs Trust told the Environment Committee that as many as 450,000 puppies each year come from unknown sources. Investigations conducted by Four Paws have revealed that almost a third of surveyed classified ads related to puppies illegally imported from Eastern Europe. These puppies are often bred in puppy farms, removed from their mothers before they turn 8 weeks old, and subject to horrific mutilation practices like ear cropping or docking tails, which was a story told again so powerfully by the Dogs Trust this week. They may also be subject to abuse in transit, with puppies sometimes as young as 4 weeks imported into the UK, often travelling across Europe in cramped conditions without food, exercise or toilet breaks and minimal water. They are then sold onto unsuspecting owners, making huge profit for those smugglers. And given the poor condition that these dogs are raised in, many then face serious and chronic health problems and socialisation issues. Now, the bill also will ensure that smugglers cannot subject puppies to mutilation practices, further cracking down on these cruel practices which are illegal in both the UK and the EU. And I do want to just acknowledge some of the powerful contributions also made today in relation to some of these points, whether that's on the illegal trade and the awareness that is so important about where the mothers and fathers have come from and what their welfare has been, that my honourable friend, the Honourable Member for Croydon Central, raised. But the very important contributions as well that the Honourable Member for Penrith raised as well in relation to diseases that can also be coming with this illegal importation. And I think we're all indebted to my honourable friend, the Honourable Member for Chester, for her discussion about the issues of ferrets. And I think I think challenging some of the myths and also just highlighting the real character and also the companionship that can come with ferrets as well. But I also want to speak to some broader issues, which the bill is important to consider in the context of, because there are broader important issues, and I want to just mention in relation to XL bullies particularly, because I have had representation on this from some very concerned constituents, and I want to raise some of the issues that they have shared with me. I think it was suggested that one of the reasons why the government dropped the kept animals bill is because there are wider issues that need to also be considered, and individual reforms can't always be considered in isolation. Because, look, we know that all animals deserve to live high quality lives, and it is important that we then have open and honest debates about a number of the challenges still that we need to address. But animals needing to live high quality lives and having the right to do that is also the reason why the last Labour government passed the landmark Animal Welfare Act in 2006, led by my honourable friend, the Right Honourable Member for Derby South. But in relation to XL bullies, I just want to make reference to calls for a review of the implementation of changes to the Dangerous Dogs Act and breed-specific legislation. Indeed, there was written evidence submitted by the Dogs Control Coalition in October, which comprises Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, Blue Cross, the British Veterinary Association, Dogs Trust, Hope Rescue, RSPCA, and others. And it recognises the importance of acting, the deep concern, and the horrific consequences of the recent dog bite incidents and the injuries and deaths that have come from that, and the clear need to tackle those. But the concern that simply banning a breed type where there may be still limited verifiable evidence isn't necessarily going to tackle the root causes of those incidents. There's acknowledgement that the larger the breed, the greater capacity for harm if they display aggressive behaviour, but there can then be a false assumption that all other dogs are safe, when the reality is that any dog could have the capacity to be dangerous if irresponsibly bred, reared and socialised. And the coalition was then raising concerns about the unintended consequences that could come, that could be impacting far more dogs and owners than intended, and lead to many thousands of dogs who are behaviourally and medically sound being put to sleep as they're encompassed in a broad standard, even if they are crossbreeds. The enforceability of the ban, they also raised around the surge that we know we've seen in demand for police, local authorities, veterinary clinics, and the rescue and rehoming organisations. But I do just want to...
Order. Before the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady intervenes, and before the Honourable Lady goes further down this route, I have a personal and passionate interest in this subject. I'm paying great attention to what she's saying. She has rather moved away from the context of the bill.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for anything. I was going to say, does she agree with me that many of these XL bully dogs are actually imported illegally, and that's one of the reasons why it's why what she's saying is in order? I hope you'd agree, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and indeed she is correct about that. And I do want to make the point about why it is important in relation to the bill that these issues are also considered more widely. And this is in relation to the matters also of illegal breeding and the lack of safety then that we can assure in relation to pets that people may be purchasing in good faith. But there will be challenges about how they have been bred and how they have been looked after in order to be sure of their safety. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you may be aware as well that that we have much by way of illegal backstreet breeders, and that isn't just in the UK. And that there ought to be more regulation of breeding. You can illegal backstreet breeders in this country can breed 3 litters a year without a licence. Those pups could end up being 30 a year, being sold at £5,000 each, and those dogs be reared to be aggressive. And in fact, what is also happening now in light of the recent ban and the way it's being reviewed and the way it's being enforced is that other more aggressive dog breeds are being bred through backstreet breeders. And my constituents have raised some of these concerns, and in relation also to what we know about pets, where they may have come from. But the devastating impact it has when your pet is at risk of being put down, who is your family. I've had constituents in tears who have said that they've come under the scope of this legislation, but they can no longer transport their dog in their car if they are driving alone and they live alone with their dog. But let me just conclude.
Order. I'm sorry to have to interrupt the Honourable Lady. There's a very great deal of meat in this bill, which she and I both understand very well indeed. But she really is going very wide of the subject. Could I bring her back now, please, to the subject of the bill that is under discussion this morning?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I was just going to be concluding my remarks there. And just to say that I do wholeheartedly welcome the bill and the opportunity to be looking at the wider issues and to ensure that this bill, when it comes through, which I hope that it will be successful in achieving its goals, but also as a catalyst for making sure that we address the wider issues that it is part of the context for. Thank you.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a great pleasure to be called to speak and to be able to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, on this vital animal welfare bill. As a proud patron of Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and a vice chair of the all-party group on dog welfare, this is an issue very close to my heart. 12 years ago, I myself was duped by what I now realise were puppy smugglers who sold me dogs, and they were so clever. So I wanted to highlight what happened to me to show that the work the government has done since this time has really made a difference. I had lost my beloved rescue dog. In my lifetime, we've rescued a couple of dozen dogs, often having them 3 at a time, and one was killed in an accident, in traffic accident in the country. I was in bits, and my mother found another Ruby Cavalier online, looked very legitimate, and took me to go and see this young puppy. On arriving, we were greeted by 2 men who told us that their mother was a very responsible breeder and she was upstairs and sadly she was about to pass away. The whole cottage we were in was set up like an elderly lady's home. It had pictures, it had chintz, it had all those homely surroundings, but I did notice the dogs were not happy. They looked distressed. We went to see a Ruby Cavalier who was 8 weeks old. He did look quite ordinary, but there was another dog there at the same time who was 6 months old, who was catatonic. He was staring at the floor, didn't react, didn't interact, and when either of these men went near him, he was shaking and visibly terrified. My mother and I left with both the dogs, but when someone tells you there's a terminally ill elderly lady upstairs, you don't ask these questions about seeing the mother. You don't ask those ordinary checks. Months later, we were suspicious, but wanted to believe we hadn't been duped. Months later, I met someone else with Cavaliers. They'd been told exactly the same story by these people 4 years before. So evidently, this very clever scam had been going on for some time, and it did take many years. The catatonic dog took maybe 3 years to be able to interact when out on walks, and just I can't imagine what he'd gone through being smuggled, taken away from his mother. It is a horrific trade. When I realised this, before I was a member here, I campaigned for Lucy's Law. I met Lucy the Cavalier and I met her owner Lisa, and I do want to commend their campaigning and the campaigning of so many other rescues to clamp down on this abominable trade that has upset so many dogs and so many owners. My constituents in Wolverhampton North East send me so many emails about dog-cat welfare. Ferret welfare, less so, but I'm sure there are ferret lovers up and down the land who will be reassured by this bill. Recent campaigns they've written to me about include greyhound racing and Monmore Green Stadium in Wolverhampton has recently closed down its cycle speedway in order to accommodate more greyhound racing. And I would urge the Minister to not let Wolverhampton become the home for UK greyhound racing, which is online betting in the Far East that has no benefit to my constituency, but does promote some questionable welfare practices. I'm not going to speak for long because I know so many people want to come and talk in this debate. But this bill in particular, it will clamp down on evil puppy smugglers, pregnant dogs being transported across borders. Someone told me that often if it's a sort of profitable breed, they will ship a pregnant dog over, take her back abroad, start again, bring her back. This poor female dogs being used to create mountains of money for unscrupulous people. In the pandemic, the cost of dogs rocketed. We know that pedigree dogs can fetch thousands of pounds now. The price has increased tenfold in some cases. So thank you to everyone, especially the member for North Devon, for their contributions. We all want united animal welfare. I want to commend the Minister for the animal welfare work that has been done by this government, but urge him to push even more and support the many private members' bills, as my glue traps private members' bill managed to pass and will thankfully come into force this year. But I know we all want this bill to be on the statute book and adopted as quickly as possible.
James Marriott.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to have the chance to speak during the second reading in support of the Animal Welfare Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill. I know that this bill and the issues it seeks to tackle are very important for many of my constituents in Ealing North. Since I was elected, I've been contacted nearly 900 times about specific campaigns to strengthen our country's animal welfare legislation. That includes, of course, the bill before us today, as well as other important pieces of animal welfare legislation, from the Kept Animals Bill to the Hunting Trophies Import Prohibition Bill. For many of my constituents, passing this legislation is a very important priority. I'm therefore glad to be able to be here today to speak in support of the bill, which includes measures to allow for regulation that would raise the minimum age for imported dogs and cats to 6 months, as well as banning the import of dogs and cats that are more than 42 days pregnant or that are mutilated. In this context, mutilation means, for example, dogs who have had their ears cropped or tail docked and cats who have been declawed. Mr Deputy Speaker, I have long supported a ban on the import of cats and dogs under the age of 6 months and their importation when they are over 42 days pregnant. Like many other honourable members, I had hoped that the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill introduced in 2021 would have addressed these issues. That bill included provisions to limit the number of dogs, cats or ferrets that can be moved on a non-commercial basis and to set restrictions on the condition of animals that can be brought into the country. As we know, that bill was carried over into the subsequent parliamentary session, but the government announced in May 2023 that the bill would not proceed further in its current form. Like many of my constituents, I was very disappointed that the government dropped the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill. I supported an opposition motion to bring the bill back as written to Parliament, but the government voted that down. That decision was not what I, my constituents, nor our dedicated animal welfare charities wanted, and it delayed the legislation getting in place. However, I welcome the fact this legislation is being debated here today with support from across the House, and I'm pleased to be here to support it too. I know that my constituents in Ealing North are far from alone in wanting to see this legislation in place. We've heard from many honourable members today, and indeed, data from a 2023 survey conducted by YouGov on behalf of the Dogs Trust showed that 83% of voters believe the UK government should crack down on the illegal smuggling of dogs into the UK. We know that this import of cats and dogs is a problem of significant scale. In 2020, the government reported that some 6,768 cats and 66,952 dogs were commercially imported into the UK. We know that this bill seeks to address this problem by enabling the national authorities in each part of the UK's 4 nations to make regulations that would help protect the welfare of dogs, cats and ferrets by imposing conditions on their import into the UK. As the Honourable Member for North Devon, who I congratulate in getting this bill introduced and bringing forward, has set out, the regulations in this bill would prohibit the import of puppies or kittens who are under the age of 6 months of age and dogs or cats who are more than 42 days pregnant or have been mutilated. Furthermore, as the Honourable Member set out, the bill also aims for England, Scotland and Wales to address the problem of commercial imports being disguised as non-commercial by introducing a limit on the number of dogs, cats and ferrets that can be imported to 5 per vehicle or 3 per foot passenger. Now, I understand that a key difference between the bill before us and the Kept Animals Bill that the government dropped last year is that this bill specifies what the regulations must include, specifically to prohibit that import of animals less than 6 months old or more than 42 days pregnant or mutilated. The Kept Animal Bill enabled these limits to be determined when the regulations were made, so I welcome the fact that this bill makes those provisions more explicit at this stage.
Hear, hear.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to be here to support this bill today. Strengthening our animal welfare laws is a priority for me and many other honourable members in this House, and I believe that beyond the important legislation we are debating today, there are many other aspects of animal welfare legislation that need to be addressed by making sure stronger laws are in place. To give an example of the context in which this bill sits, I believe there should be measures to prevent the theft of cats and dogs from happening, and I therefore welcome the Pet Abduction Bill, which was introduced in 2023. That legislation would create offences of dog abduction and cat abduction, and also includes powers to make similar provisions for other pets. Whilst dogs and cats are now sentient beings under the law, I have been concerned there is not a specific offence for pet theft. Instead, as animals fall under the definition of property, that offence is treated similarly to stealing an inanimate object. I'm concerned that although sentencing can take account of the emotional impact on the human victim, the dog or cat's financial worth is the biggest factor. In my view, this means the punishment does not come close to fitting the crime or acting as a deterrent. Pet theft is not simply a matter of theft of an item, nor should it be treated as such by law. I know that losing a pet can cause great emotional pain. I declare an interest. I think of how I would feel if our cat at home, Orna, were to be stolen. I firmly support the Pet Abduction Bill, as well as measures to improve it.
Order. I have to impress upon honourable members that the bill under discussion this morning is concerned with the illegal importing of puppies and kittens and ferrets. Could the honourable gentleman please stick to the subject under debate?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I will return to the main subject of the debate now, having put that context there, because I know from my constituents how important it is for all aspects of animal welfare to be addressed. And I'll conclude by saying that in my home borough, we're very lucky to have the annual Ealing Animals Fair, which took place for the 45th time earlier this month. I was very glad to be able to attend, and I would like to thank all those involved and put on record my particular thanks to Dr. Marion Garnett for putting on such an important event year after year. Those at the fair, I know, would be amongst the first to tell you that this legislation today is much needed, and also there are many other aspects of animal welfare legislation that need attention. And so I'm very glad to be playing my part here today in supporting the second reading of this bill. I look forward to this bill making progress as swiftly as possible and becoming law.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I strongly welcome this bill and congratulate my honourable friend for North Devon on introducing it. By banning the import of puppies and kittens under 6 months and dogs and cats that are mutilated or heavily pregnant, the bill will improve animal welfare. It will also address the abuse of non-commercial rules that comprise animal treatment and biosecurity. And the intentions of the bill are endorsed across this House. They're endorsed by my Northwest Norfolk constituents, and tackling this illicit trade is one of our manifesto commitments. As a cat owner, I know the joy that pets bring, and as my honourable friend, the member for Penrith and the Border, has said, owning a pet became a lot more popular during the pandemic. But why are imported pets so popular? Well, gangs promote fashionable breeds, buyers are misled about the animal's background, and many buyers are seemingly unaware of the hidden risks involved, which often lead to animal abandonment. And the RSPCA has reported that such abandonment incidents are up nearly 50% on 3 years ago. And my local RSPCA rehoming centre has many pets up for adoption. And I was reading my local Lynn News this morning, for example. There are 2 cats featured, Finley and Joshua, who are looking for a new home, and also many dogs there. So I encourage anyone looking for a pet to explore the rehoming centres near them. I speak of what I did because my cat, Hetty, is a rescue cat as well, so I firmly encourage people to do that.
Hear, hear.
We urgently need to introduce the powers in this bill to reduce the number of pets coming illegally into our country to minimise animal suffering. And as Four Paws, RSPCA, Cats Protection, Dog Trust and Battersea found, as many as 30 puppies being sold online had been illegally imported into the UK. And Cats Protection's Cats in Their Stats Survey 2023 found 50,000 cats have been imported. Bringing puppies and kittens at such a young age means their immune system cannot withstand infections. So it's time to end this abusive trade, and I pay tribute to all of the pet charities who've campaigned long and hard for it, and I again commend my humble friend for her work bringing this legislation forward today.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This bill is deeply welcomed, and I particularly support the measures to prevent pet smuggling, though I fail to understand why the government pulled the Kept Animals Bill and instead uses precious private members' bills to get the same necessary legislation. The puppy trade has become worth up to $3 billion in the UK, with the sale of up to 2 million puppies annually. As much as 50% of the industry is either illegal or unlicensed. I also want to speak on the issue of cat and kitten smuggling. I apologise to the Honourable Member for Garston and Halewood, the Right Honourable Member for Garston and Halewood. I am not going to be talking about ferrets in this section of my speech. I strongly believe that cats and kittens must be given parity with dogs from the outset of any new legislation. Cats Protection 2023 reports highlights that an estimated 50,000 cats acquired in the last 12 months preceding the survey were from an overseas source. The charity says it's unclear whether any health and welfare checks were done on all of these cats or what conditions they were subjected to during travel, meaning some arrived in the UK in an extremely poor state of health or carrying infectious diseases that they could pass on to other cats. Many felines also become very stressed during long journeys, leading to related illnesses such as cystitis. Cats Protection believes there is a heightened risk of kitten smuggling due to the increasing popularity of high-value pedigree breeds, which can be sold for thousands of pounds, and this demand is rising. According to their report, there has been a significant rise in pure breed and pedigree cats. Of the cats obtained in the last 12 months, 42% of them were pedigree or purebred, compared to 17% more than 5 years ago. Higher prices and increasing demand make these cats an attractive target for illegal importation by those wishing to make a quick profit. And can I say at this point to members, but also everybody listening, our rescue cats really need homes. I am mother to, well, many have said that I'm a she-cat. I am mother to Stanley, who came from Kaching, a Rotherham and Sheffield charity, and also to Meerkat and Sue from Cats Protection. They are fantastic pets. They need our support. You're not spending a fortune on them and you get the support of that charity. But let me change the tone. I also want to speak to the horrific mutilation of declawing cats. The Kept Animals Bill took positive steps to limit the importation of dogs with mutilations, including ear cropping, but concerningly, with cat mutilations, they weren't included in the proposals. Most notably omitted was the vile declawing procedure, which is extremely painful and distressing and prevents cats from exhibiting normal scratching behaviour. It's basically the equivalent of amputating a human fingertip at the first knuckle and is already illegal in the UK. Can I therefore give credit to the Honourable Member for North Devon, as her bill prohibits the importation of both dogs and cats who've been mutilated. I strongly support this bill, as I believe it will go a long way in protecting our beloved dogs and pets from pet smugglers, dogs and cats from pet smugglers looking to exploit them for profit. And I commend the Honourable Member for her commitment to this cause.
Louis Frank.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and in the short time I'm going to speak for today, let me start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, for all of her campaigning and championing of this bill. You've been fantastic all the way through this. And this is a bill which helps us meet our manifesto commitments to crack down on the illegal smuggling of dogs and puppies. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to my honourable friend for Penrith for all of the incredible expertise that he's shared over the 2 years that I've been in this place, and like many other colleagues here, I've learned a great deal from his veterinary experience. The United Kingdom and this Conservative government can be proud of our record on animal welfare, with some of the strongest protections in the world. Colleagues are right to highlight the excellent progress that has been made on this, and while we have been in government, Mr Deputy Speaker, we have already made microchipping mandatory for dogs and cats, helping to reunite lost pets with their owners, protected service animals by introducing Finn's Law, and tightened the sales of puppies and kittens with Lucy's Law. We've also introduced tougher sentencing for animal cruelty, an issue that I know many of my constituents are passionate about. We've banned the use of wild animals in circuses and also introduced one of the toughest bans on the sale of ivory sales in the world. But we can and must go further. Since being elected to this place, strengthening the protections in place for animal welfare has been a priority of mine. Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, I made my maiden speech in this place during the passage of the Animal Sentience Act in 2022 on this issue, which is a priority of mine, not only as an animal lover, but also because of the great passion that many of my constituents in Old Bexley and Sidcup have for their pets. Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, over the course of my 2 years in this place, I have received well over 3,000 emails from constituents on animal welfare and other related issues. That is almost 4 emails every single day. I know from the range of animal welfare charities that I also work with, as well as from the thousands of constituents who continue to contact me on this, that they are increasingly concerned about the emerging markets which involve the importation of heavily pregnant dogs and cats, as well as those which have been mutilated. Of course, we would have all liked to have seen this bill come sooner, but I'm glad that this bill has the government's support, as well as mine, and it aims to finally end this barbaric practice and trade. Quite rightly, this bill will ramp up the fight against the cruel puppy smuggling trade and will bring an end to the suffering of countless dogs that are caught up in it. Often, these are now coming from Eastern European countries. Since 2014, the Dogs Trust, a brilliant charity who I've met with multiple times, they're doing fantastic work to advance the protections of dogs in particular, and have been exposing the widespread abuse of the pet travel scheme. The scheme was designed for those taking their own pets on holiday with them, but instead has been used as a cover for those who are smuggling puppies across borders. Luckily for many of these poor dogs, Dogs Trust has taken care of more than 3,000 illegally imported puppies, which, if they had been sold to unsuspecting members of the public, would have made approximately £4.5 million for criminal importers. And I know from my own visits and work outside of this place that Battersea Dogs Home and Cats Home in London are also doing fantastic work in this area. And as my honourable friend for Norfolk in front of me said, the importance of rescues, and I think we should always try and take a rescue wherever we can. There are many brilliant veterinary groups and charities in this area that we could all list, such as Battersea, the Cats Protection League, Four Paws, RSPCA, and of course the brilliant Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation. But rather than continue to list them all, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know we've got a particular interest in this area of your fantastic work over the years, I would instead say thank you to each of them for the wonderful work they continue to do in raising awareness in this place and across the country for those animals who need our protection. Whether it be in Old Bexley and Sidcup, North Devon, across the United Kingdom, we are a nation of animal lovers. I am sure that, like many of my constituents, would agree, word for word, with my honourable friend from North Devon when she said, "Pets are family, not property." And that it is horrific to hear stories of puppies being smuggled across the border and the poor conditions they have to endure. That is why, on my constituents' behalf in Old Bexley and Sidcup, I welcome this bill and I will continue to support it at every stage along its journey onto the statute book.
Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I want to begin by congratulating the Honourable Lady, the Member for North Devon, in bringing forward this legislation, and also actually in coming up in the ballot, because it's not easy to come up in the private member's bill ballot. It's only happened to me once in 26 years. So she's done well to come up in the ballot, and she's picked an issue that's very important across the House to many members. And I can say for sure, over the years that I've been a member in this House, and as I say, it's now 26 years, the postbag that I've had over that time, whether it be by letter or more recently by email and text and social media, is overwhelmingly dominated by those constituents who write to me about the issues of animal welfare and wanting to improve animal welfare. And I suspect that my experience in respect of that is not dissimilar to that of many other members of this House, that we do get a big postbag full of animal welfare issues that are raised with us by our constituents, and we are indeed, I think, in this nation, a nation of animal lovers. And so I think that the Honourable Lady has done well to select this issue. I'm not being unpleasant to her if I say that she seems to have had some help with the drafting, which, given the complications of this issue, is probably a good thing. And I'm sure that the government have improved on the drafting in the previous animal welfare legislation that they withdrew, that was more comprehensive, but that included some issues in respect of this. And I could compliment the Honourable Lady on one other thing before I move on to the substance of the bill, and that is the fact that she is implementing a manifesto commitment of her party, which is more than they've managed to do from the government front bench so far. So she should be congratulated for that as well, because it's not a usual or an easy thing to do. The only issue is whether or not this Parliament lasts long enough for her to get this legislation all the way onto the statute book. Obviously, it has to go through the other place, and it has to get through its remaining stages here. And I think there's a bit of a queue in committee, if it gets through today, Mr Deputy Speaker, a few bills ahead of it. So my advice to her, as somebody who has managed to sort of get a private member's bill onto the statute book by forcing the government to do it later, my advice to her would be, don't stop fussing behind the scenes, don't stop pressing and pushing them to make sure that the bill, if it does succeed today at its second reading, it looks very much to me like it will, Mr Deputy. Of course I will.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her kind words, but she clearly doesn't know me very well. I never stop pushing.
I'm very glad to hear that, because it certainly gives her a better chance of making sure that the government doesn't go soft or doesn't slack when it comes to doing all the necessary things to make sure this bill does end up on the statute book. And I think she'd be congratulated by many across the House if she does manage to do it, because obviously there's the legislation, there are consultations, the regulations have to be written, the regulations have to be consulted on, and obviously the bill has to get through committee, it has to get through report back in this House, and we do have a concertina effect on when private members' bill Fridays are coming up, Mr Deputy Speaker, so she's going to have to get that bill through committee fast. Yep. Would be my other little bit of advice. And there's a queue ahead of her of other bills that have got through their second reading. So she does need to keep pushing in the right directions in respect of that. Now, the bill does take up some of the provisions that were in the more comprehensive piece of legislation that the government withdrew in 2023, as I recall. But they've been trying to do this since 2019, since the election in 2019, when it was in their manifesto. So I do think it's a good thing that she's bringing forward these provisions. And as my honourable friend, the member for Ealing, said, there is a little extra detail, I think, in this bill than was apparent in the original legislation, and that I think is also a good thing, because I think it's not a correct modern fashion in legislative drafting to leave everything to the regulations. Sometimes it's a good idea to have the provisions actually in the primary legislation. In my view, Mr Deputy Speaker, might make me a bit old-fashioned, but I do think there's something to be said for it. And so I congratulate the Honourable Lady on getting a few more details on precisely what's going to be done into the primary legislation. That holds the feet of whatever government is then trying to implement the legislation to the fire, and there's something to be said for that. I think that the change in the law that she's seeking to make, and it's been mentioned by a number of honourable members in their contributions to the debate today, is good in respect of dogs and cats, because currently the lower age limit to import a dog or cat is 15 weeks. Pregnant dogs and cats may be imported, as the Honourable Gentleman for Penrith and the Border, with his extra knowledge of these things, mentioned, until the last 10% of their pregnancy, and up to 5 cats or dogs or cats per person imported, and the owner can authorise somebody else to travel. I think it's entirely good, the changes that we've discussed today, being made to those to those limits, I think that can only be good for reasons that I won't repeat, that have been raised by other members during the course of the debate. Now, ferrets are included in the short title of the bill, and the Honourable Lady was kind enough to respond to me when I intervened on her that the reason that ferrets are included is because they can get rabies, and so there's something desirable to be said about controlling imports of ferrets. And that to me is a good enough reason to include them in the short title of the bill. But I have noticed that we don't seem to have had a lot of representations about ferrets. We don't seem to have had examples given to us about abuse of ferrets in the way in which we have seen examples in respect of dogs and cats. So I was wondering if the Minister, when he comes to reply, can just let us know whether or not ferrets are there purely as a rabies control measure, or is there evidence that there is abuse of ferrets, in importing of ferrets? Because it's not something, I must say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I have a wide range of knowledge on, and so I'd be interested to know if there are similar issues as those that have been raised about dogs and cats when it comes to ferrets, or is the reason that they're in the short title of the bill simply the disease control, which to my mind is a good enough reason. But I wonder if there ought to be further provisions in respect of safety of ferrets that are not set out in the regulations so far that have been said. So I'd be interested to hear what the Minister might have to say about that.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way, of course.
I am very interested about my honourable friend's, keen mention of ferrets at every opportunity during this debate. And just to put on record, my brother had a ferret called Oscar.
Well, she has that now on the record. I don't really know what else to say about that, except I'm sure that Oscar brought her brother
great joy,
and that's what pets do, and I'm sure there are many other ferret owners who might attest to the same thing. My interest in ferrets is purely because they're in the short title of the bill, yet there don't seem to be any provisions in respect of or evidence that there's abuse. And so that's why I keep raising the issue of ferrets. But and I'm sure the Minister will be able to enlighten us when he comes to reply. The other issue that I particularly wanted to raise in the debate, and I've raised it a number of times on interventions, but I know that this legislation has taken a part of the old comprehensive legislation, and it doesn't deal with penalties. And there are no provisions in the bill about penalties. It's all very well as all objecting to the cruel and appalling way in which animals have been abused and treated in great numbers by those seeking to make profit out of their misery. But the only way in which we can make sure that ceases is by having good, effective enforcement, and making sure that those who do seek to profit in this way are made an example of through the courts. Now, I know that the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act of 2021 did increase sentencing for animal cruelty from a maximum of what was 6 months to 5 years. It's not totally apparent to me, and perhaps again the Minister can enlighten us when he replies, if he's listening. He might be able to enlighten us about whether or not the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act 2021 does in fact provide the enforcement and penalty regime for this legislation. Is that the way in which breaches of this legislation will be punished through the provisions of the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act 2021, or is there some other regime of punishment and penalty that is somewhere else? Now, obviously, in a comprehensive bill, the penalties would probably be there with all the provisions. But given that the government, with the help of the Honourable Lady for North Devon, have chosen to slice and dice their approach to animal welfare legislation and bring forward separate bills, I do hope that the Minister will be able to explain when he comes to reply to the debate quite where the penalties are written, what they will be, and are they being increased? Can they be increased by regulation? And what he might expect those who fall foul of this new improved legislation what penalties and punishments they might expect to meet if they continue in their nefarious activities. And that brings me to the other point that I wanted to raise, and that is the issue of enforcement. Now, I know that I've raised it on interventions on a number of occasions during the course of the debate, and the honourable gentleman, the member for Penrith and the Borders, did have something to say about it too. But having the law and the statute book is good. It's a good first step. It doesn't stop abuse of the law. It's enforcement that stops abuse of the law. So I wonder if the honourable lady, when she replies to the debate, but perhaps the minister in his reply, might say something about enforcement. Since the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act 2021 increased the maximum penalties for animal abuse, have there been increased prosecutions? Have people gone to jail? And have they gone to jail for more than 6 months, which was the previous maximum term? And can we expect those who smuggle puppies and who do so because it's a lucrative trade, they can make hundreds of thousands of pounds doing this? Therefore, the enforcement and punishment regime needs to match the scale of that potential profit that they can make. Otherwise, the law will sit there and it will not work in the way in which those of us in this House who support it from across the chamber wish it to work. So I welcome this bill very much. I congratulate the Honourable Lady from North Devon on choosing it when she fortuitously came up in the ballot in the way in which she did. And I hope that the Minister will be able to reassure those of us who support this bill around the chamber, and there have been very, very many of us speaking today. I hope he'll be able to reassure us about precisely what is going to happen on enforcement and what the penalty and punishment regime is. Because it's all very well getting the law right if we don't then enforce it, catch the perpetrators and pursue them through the law to the maximum available opportunity, then these lucrative trades will continue and we will still have problems with animal welfare in this country. That having been said, I'd like to finish by congratulating the Honourable Lady for North Devon on bringing forward this piece of legislation. I hear what she says when she says she's tenacious she'll have to be to get all this done before the Prime Minister calls a general election, but I know she will stick at it. Hopefully then we can get this bill onto the statute book and doing some of the good which it purports to want to do. But that will only work if the government can reassure us that they're going to get on with the regulations and get this working as soon as possible, because they've spent the whole of this Parliament saying they're going to do this and not managed to do it yet. So at the end of this Parliament, perhaps the Minister can stand up and say that he actually managed to do this and got it right to where it needs to be, and perhaps he can reassure us about enforcement and about punishment. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Flick Drummond.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I will start with thanking my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, for introducing the Animal Welfare Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill as a private member's bill, and congratulate her on her very good speech. I've had an incredible number of emails regarding this bill, which shows the strength of feeling on this topic. The deep levels of concern around the welfare of pet animals, which are being brought into the UK, was shown in a YouGov poll from 2023, which showed that 83% of the public think that the government should crack down on puppy smuggling. As Conservatives, we deeply care for our environment and for animal welfare. We are a nation of pet lovers. Our pets are part of our families, stopping loneliness and getting people out of the house in the case of dog owners. And in the spirit of the day, may I mention some of my pets. Marcus, the English Bull Terrier, Toby, the English Pointer, Cat Saluka, as a Siamese cat, and Cassio and Othello, who are very nice English moggies. My cats and dogs came from homes that could not keep them. So I've been very lucky to know where they come from, but not every animal has had the same background, which is why I'm so pleased that this bill has been presented. Ending the smuggling of dogs, puppies, cats and ferrets was an important part of the 2019 Conservative Manifesto on animal welfare commitments. So this bill will fill the gaps in current legislation which pet smugglers are abusing. We know that for the smugglers, this illegal business model is highly lucrative. It was estimated to be around 150 million in 2021, with the prices of dogs ranging from £500 to £7,000. In 2021, 843 cats and dogs were seized at the port of Dover. There were 500 in 2023 and were found to be non-compliant with import requirements. Puppy farms in places like Romania, Hungary and Poland breed dogs and separate them from their mothers while too young to travel, meaning their immune system cannot withstand infections. These smugglers are disguising commercial movements of pets, pretending they're non-commercial, to avoid the more stringent requirements with a pet passport. The Pets Travel scheme is being abused. Pets which are smuggled are unlikely to have had any veterinarian input, including vaccinations such as rabies and parasite treatments necessary for legal entry to the UK, making these poor animals a health risk for other pets and also humans. These criminals then deceive unsuspecting buyers, if we've heard from my friend from Wolverhampton North, and deceive people into believing they're acquiring a pet from a professional breeder by presenting the mother together with their offspring. The mother may have been brought in heavily pregnant. So I'm pleased that this bill will establish regulations which raise the minimum age of imported dogs and cats, and presumably ferrets too, although I'm not quite sure about that one, to 6 months, and ban the import of dogs and cats that are more than 42 days pregnant or mutilated. The bill will amend for England, Scotland and Wales EU rules assimilated into UK law to limit to 5 the number of cats and dogs imported per vehicle, or 3 per foot passenger. Pets are regarded as family members, and it's time we protected them as such. The steps proposed in the Animal Welfare Bill on the movement of pets across the borders into Britain is desperately needed. This bill provides a clear pathway to end the suffering of these innocent animals. The cruel business of pet smuggling cannot be allowed to continue any longer, and this bill is our chance to fulfil our 2019 commitment, implementing a future where pets are safely and ethically brought into the UK. And as an animal lover, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue of great importance, and I know that her persistence will make sure that this bill goes into law very shortly. I am fully supportive of this bill, and I'm looking forward to seeing it proceeding through this House.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to thank the honourable member for North Devon again for bringing such an important bill forward. I'm not here just because of my constituents in Norfolk who are hugely animal lovers, but also because I've always tried to champion animal welfare issues and speak on these matters each and every time they've come to the House. But also because it's an area that I have personally invested a lot of time and care into, in particular in looking after rescue animals my whole life. And I can't therefore go away from this table without mentioning my beloved pet rescue cat, Clapton, who I will come on to in just a moment, who sadly passed last month. Our rescue guinea pig, Pickle, my children.
House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound.
And they continue to lay for another 3 years after we got them. So can I commend him for his efforts in serving chickens?
Well, I'd like to thank the honourable member for that, and of course his efforts for rescuing chickens and giving them that good laying. They can often lay for many years afterwards. Well done for everything you've done. But look, we should be very proud in this place about our collective efforts for leading the world in raising animal welfare standards, and we are doing that again today. Cats, as I've just mentioned, is very important to me. My family, as I said, just lost our beloved rescue cat Clapton to cancer last month. He became so thin he was unable to eat because of the cancer in his mouth that unfortunately it was time to say goodbye. But I used to take him to the vets down the road, and every time Clapton Baker was called into the room, I used to get a slight giggle from the constituents who recognised and knew me. But as the Right Honourable Member for Suffolk Coastal said before, our pets are loved forever, and my children certainly loved Clapton. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be another rock star named rescue cat in my family one day. We just need to decide when and whether it'll be a meatloaf baker, a Mercury baker, a Springsteen baker, or even a Jagger baker. That's one of my favourites. We shall go into that. But look, this is important today, this debate, to look at and regulate the import of the 3 titled pets that we have got. We saw a huge spike in North Norfolk during the pandemic of pet theft, particularly of dogs, because my area is probably well known of being elderly and demographic, having 52 miles of coastline, and dogs are absolutely everywhere. You're almost unheard of if you are retired in North Norfolk without a pet dog. And so it was a huge problem in the pandemic, and I was proud to be part of the pet theft task force that helped. I will keep my remarks relatively short, but the Honourable Member for the City of Chester did mention earlier on, quite a few hours ago now, about ferrets, and that there weren't many people perhaps in the chamber that had a lot to do with ferrets in their previous life. Well, I'm going to now disappoint, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the country bumpkin that I am means that I have indeed, 30 years ago, with a friend of mine, kept ferrets. But it was a very, very entrepreneurial keeping of ferrets, because we did our civic duty. School allowed us to keep some ferrets behind the garages, and every lunchtime we would go out to the hospital grounds next door and catch the rabbits that were ruining the hospital lawns and grounds. So we were entrepreneurial. The local butcher paid us 50 pence a rabbit that we took there. A pound for a buck. And the only reason that we had to stop our entrepreneurial hobby was because the teachers would complain that we smelt so bad. And our parents equally said, look, Duncan, you need to give up this hobby. You smell so terrible, because ferrets, as you well know, do not smell particularly good. However, there is a serious point to all of today. Clearly, it is in a 21st century a real awful state that heavily pregnant dogs and puppies endure such terrible long journeys. The mutilations, as we've heard from many people about cropped ears, is simply not fit for purpose today. And of course, declawing cats is not only abhorrent, painful, but it takes away their absolute, part of their DNA to get up in the morning and go scratching at their scratch post. We only till a couple of weeks ago still had Clapton's scratch post in the corner of the kitchen. To think of him not here anymore, but to have his claws removed so that he couldn't do what his natural instinct is absolutely appalling. So look, I'm going to sum up my comments and say, look, all credit should be going to the Honourable Member for North Devon. It is her day today for bringing this forward. She has been widely praised by many institutions, including the RSPCA, and I really thank her for bringing this today. Well done on what you've done.
Selaine Hart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I congratulate my honourable friend, the Member for North Devon, for securing this debate and bringing this bill for animal welfare. I'm going to keep my speech short because I know that the Honourable Member for Rotherham would like to get to her bill, and others, certainly on this side, would like to give the opportunity to the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk for her important bill, as she also got a place in the ballot, but which Labour members are keen to avoid by talking it out because they've got no interest in safeguarding children against extreme trans ideology and are fricked about any debate on this issue at all. So moving on, it is vital that we push our legislation further than we already have to close the gaps that allow for the harm and exploitation of dogs, cats and ferrets. This government has already taken essential steps to protect our beloved animals, and it's been an offence since 2006 under the Animal Welfare Act to crop a dog's ears, and since 2021, anyone convicted of this offence may receive a prison sentence of up to 5 years and/or an unlimited fine. And the puppy pilot scheme set up in 2015 and massively pioneered by the Dogs Trust has allowed for the rescue of over 3,100 illegally imported puppies. Furthermore, the introduction of Lucy's Law in 2020 has meant any new puppy or kitten in England must now be bought directly from a breeder or adopted from a rescue centre instead. And the Action Plan for Animal Welfare was introduced in 2021 with the goal of tackling puppy smuggling through changes to import rules, introducing compulsory microchipping for cats, cracking down on pet thefts through a new government task force, and the banning of remote-controlled training e-collars. A significant number of my constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker, care deeply about animal welfare, as do I, and have contacted me about their enormous support for this bill. And I'd particularly like to highlight the dedicated work of my constituent, Jane Band, regarding Finn's Law and Finn's Law Part 2, and her consistent campaigning for animal rights. Finn's Law was passed in 2019, and Finn's Law Part 2 Animal Welfare Sentencing Act passed in June 2021. And it was the Honourable Member for West Dorset who secured this legislation as a private member's bill, which I happily supported. These were all necessary steps to help protect the lives of domesticated animals, and through this bill, I also hope to see the protection extended to imported and smuggled animals. So, moving on to finalise my speech, individuals who mutilate animals and illegally smuggle them into this country lack care compassion, and they are very bad people. Improvements must be made to stop innocent animals enduring these illegal and unnecessary journeys and procedures, and we must also make it clear that precise efforts to ensure that these criminal activities do not go unpunished. This bill, my honourable friend here, and these animals deserve our support.
Shadow Minister Steve Reed.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for North Devon for bringing forward this very important private members' bill. As we've heard from members all over the House, it's overdue, it's extremely welcome, and is being supported and will be supported on all sides of the House. I'd like to congratulate colleagues on this side of the House who have participated in the debate so far. The Honourable Member for the City of Chester reminds us that we rarely talk about ferrets in this House, and it is true. The Honourable Member for West Lancashire reminds us, or perhaps told us for the first time, if we didn't know, that April the 2nd is National Ferret Day. And I suspect not many of us did know that, and I hope she will get the ferret that she seems to have set her heart on. The Honourable Member for Garston and Halewood asks what I thought were very pertinent questions of the Minister, who will be responding shortly, about the risk of rabies from illegally imported ferrets and the very important threat to biosecurity in this country, which is something we should all be very aware and concerned about. Then the Honourable Member for Wakefield talked about the absolute horrors of ear cropping, a mutilation that is often carried out without any anaesthetic at all, to the torment of the animal that is involved. And my honourable friend from Feltham and Heston talked about the cruelty of illegal puppy farming. My honourable friend and next-door neighbour from Croydon Central talked about how difficult it can be if, as a family, you're going out to buy a new family pet, how difficult it can be to identify a legitimate breeder, and the concerns many people going out to buy have, because that journey is so difficult, and families do not want to be supporting the illegal import and illegal breeding of animals, but it's far too difficult for people to find out which animals have been bred legitimately and which animals have been subject to abuse, including illegal breeding. Then my honourable friend, the member for Ealing North, raised his constituents' concerns about the government dropping the Kept Animals Bill after spending 2 years developing it, and urges the government to do more to focus on animal welfare in the time that remains until the general election, whenever that comes. And then my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, talking about the importance of rescue cats. Of course, we had some very fine speeches from the government benches as well, and I'll leave it to the Minister to go through those in detail. I won't, but I would like just to mention what I thought was an outstanding speech from the honourable member for Penrith and the border, incredibly persuasive, with insights that clearly drew on his great professional experience before he entered this House. Now, I successfully introduced a private member's bill myself in 2018, so I know very well the perils and pitfalls in steering legislation through Parliament in this way, and I do pay tribute again to the Honourable Lady for her success in building such widespread support. It was clear this morning in this debate, such widespread support for the important measures she aims to bring into law. The bill that I brought was the Mental Health Unit's Use of Force Act 2018, also won support on all sides of the House. But very disappointingly, 6 years later, it has still not been brought fully into force. So I hear what the Honourable Member is saying about the need to keep pushing, and I would urge her, if this bill goes through, to keep pushing. And I wish her more success than I've had, particularly with the current Minister for Mental Health, who doesn't seem interested in carrying out the wishes of this House, expressed unanimously when that important piece of legislation went through. Other ministers for health have taken much more interest in it and helped push that legislation forwards, and I do hope the current one will reflect again on why she hasn't followed the will of this House, expressed democratically and freely in a vote, and ensured that that law comes fully into force as soon as possible. Now, animal welfare is a matter of the highest concern to the British public. We've heard that on all sides this morning. And I want to start by being absolutely clear that we on this side of the House are pleased to support this bill. We believe the measures in it are long overdue. And it's been very interesting to hear the personal testament of members across the House of their own experience of owning pets, of buying pets, and of wanting to make sure that the animals they buy have been well treated and bred properly. Other members have mentioned their pets, and it would be very remiss of me not to mention mine. I had a rescue cat called Tigger for 18 years that we sadly lost in 2010. More recently, 2 rescue cats, Smudge and Pixie. Smudge we lost last year, sadly to kidney disease. Pixie, you'll be pleased to hear, Madam Deputy Speaker, is still alive and well, and they both incurred a modicum of fame, I'm pleased to say, when I entered them into the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home competition to elect per minister, and they were the first cats to jointly be elected per minister, a matter of great pride to our family, although not so much to my partner, who's now the only member of our household never to have been elected to anything. But it's our ownership of companion pets that gives us that insight into how important they can be as part of a family. And that's why, we've been hearing this morning the horrible abuses of declawing, of cropped ears, of docked tails. The cruelty of this is brought home all the more because so many of us have experienced owning and loving a companion pet ourselves, as have many, many members of the great British public, and it's one of the reasons the public are so concerned about these issues. Now, puppy and kitten smuggling is an absolutely horrific abuse, and it requires legislation from preventing it from happening. That's why we're so pleased the Honourable Lady has brought forward her private member's bill today. Cracking down on the illegal smuggling of dogs and puppies was a commitment that appeared in the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto. And as my honourable friend, the member for Wakefield, said, it is hugely regrettable that the government did not, in the end, fully pursue their own legislation, government legislation, to meet that commitment. I fully understand, and I'm sure the Minister will repeat when he's on his feet, that they are supporting the private member's bill today. But those of us familiar with Friday sittings and private member's bill know how uncertain that route can be. It's all too easy for a single lone member who is hostile to the proposed legislation to use procedural tactics to block the bill from proceeding, even in circumstances where the vast majority of honourable and right honourable members are fully in support of them. My private member's bill, for instance, was talked out by a member of the Conservative Party, despite having almost universal cross-party support, and I was immensely grateful to government whips who later found time so that it could come back. But despite that strong support from the government, the legislation has still not been fully commenced. So I repeat again, there are real concerns about whether and how the government pursues private members' bill even when they are enacted, which is why we would have preferred to see this legislation brought through as part of government legislation rather than subject to the vagaries of Friday sittings and private members' bills. Yes.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, and he's right to raise procedural issues with the private members' bill process being a threat to a bill getting all the way through. Does he agree with me that because many bills have already got through the second reading in this session, there's going to be a pile-up at committee for getting the Honourable Lady's bill through committee in time to get it back for the private members' bill Fridays that give priority to report stages and remaining stages? So that is also a concern, is it not?
Well, I'm very grateful to her for her intervention, and of course she has experience herself of pursuing a private member's bill through the House, and I think the point she makes is absolutely right. We've got 30 private members' bills on the agenda just today, so it does look like we're going to have a big backlog, and we certainly need the government to be prioritising bills that they want to support, and I hope that we'll hear from the Minister today that this bill will secure support from the government and will be a priority in being enacted, getting royal assent and getting onto the statute books. Now, the bill before us today, of course, started out as part of the Kept Animals Bill, which was introduced by the government in 2021. It contained measures to crack down on puppy and kitten smuggling, but the government, regrettably, to many campaigners, and they voiced this very articulately themselves, incomprehensibly to many campaigners, abandoned that bill. And it's hard to understand why they did that, given the strong public support for the measures contained within it and the fact that the government controls legislation as it is moving through this House. It controls the business of this House. The full bill was a golden opportunity to improve the health and welfare of millions of animals. The proposals had very wide public support, and animal welfare charities had worked hard to help shape the bill before the government, regrettably, abandoned it. Members on all sides of the House and many of our constituents, we've all had letters about this, I'm sure we all have. I'm not unique in this House in having had hundreds of emails about the government abandoning the Kept Animals Bill. They deeply regret that the government chose to ditch such an important and significant piece of legislation. And as a result of that decision, countless animals have suffered needless pain and distress through the unscrupulous practice of puppy and kitten smuggling and through the export of live animals for fattening and slaughter in countries where animal welfare standards are far lower than in this country. Now, it's been expressed many times this morning, there's real gratitude to the Honourable Member for North Devon for her efforts to bring back important measures that were part of that bill, including those on puppy and kitten smuggling. The provisions in the Kept Animals Bill that are brought back today are important because there's recently been a shocking, indeed a sickening increase in the number of animals imported into the United Kingdom with pitifully little attention paid to their welfare, either during transportation or often in how and where they were bred. The horrific reality is that the puppy trade has become a multi-million-pound transnational industry based on the abuse of living sentient creatures and on the deception of well-meaning individuals who want to buy a family pet. 2 million puppies are sold every year in the UK alone, a trade with a total value of £3 billion. Battersea Dogs and Cats Home estimate that up to 50% of this trade is either illegal or unlicensed and takes place outside any oversight from regulation or enforcement. Half of the animals involved originate outside the United Kingdom, often in completely unknown circumstances, with all the risk that implies for low standards of animal welfare and animal health. It's less well known that criminals involved in the illegal trade in puppies are often also engaged in other forms of cross-border crime. These involve drug dealing, money laundering, and even people trafficking. The European Union's strategy to tackle organised crime recognises the illegal trade in companion animals within Europe as an ongoing concern with severe implications for human as well as for animal welfare. Now, my honourable friend, the honourable member for the City of Chester, pointed out the government's decision to abandon the Kept Animals Bill delayed the much-needed clampdown on this vile and illegal trade. And that delay has left criminals feeling emboldened during this intervening period. A recent report published by the charity Four Paws on the illegal puppy trade in the United Kingdom found that over 30% of imported puppies were from Romania alone. This is simply unacceptable. How can it be that criminals have been able to bring so many vulnerable animals into this country from conditions over which there is little, if any, welfare or health supervision and control?
I'm grateful to him for giving way on that point. Does he agree that cracking down with proper enforcement, then having tough penalties that are enforced, is a way not only of tackling this vile trade, but getting the additional benefit of taking some serious criminals off our streets as well?
Well, she makes a very important point indeed. Prosecution and punishment of those responsible for any crime, other than these particular vile and heinous crimes, is essential in deterring other people who want to profit from the same exploitation of animals and people that we're seeing in this vile trade in puppy and kitten smuggling. Nobody wants to see that, but we could have had more focus on it, we could have had more sanctions on it, had the government pursued the original legislation rather than delaying it and then supporting it coming back in part, at least, as a private member's bill instead. The circumstances in which animals are bred are also changing. A growing number of puppies are bred not only in vast industrial scale puppy farms, but in sheds, repurposed small holdings, urban tower blocks and warehouses. We've seen images of these poor, desperate creatures tied up, often left shivering in the freezing cold, in filthy cages covered in their own excrement, sometimes reduced to eating their own excrement. It is distressing beyond words to see any of these images and any of these videos. So thank goodness we have this bill before us today. But what a crying shame the government has done so little about this vile trade up until now, and then abandoned the original legislation that could have brought in measures far sooner to save countless of these defenceless animals from abuse by the most unscrupulous traders and criminal gangs. The RSPCA is the world's oldest and largest animal welfare charity, founded here in England in 1824. They've been at the forefront in raising public awareness and concern about puppy smuggling. And I pay tribute to the RSPCA for their many years of campaigning on this issue and so many other animal welfare issues as well. The RSPCA has highlighted that many dogs smuggled into this country to be sold on the underground puppy market have long-term health problems, as well as behavioural issues due to their breeding and very negative experiences early on in life. We're talking about puppies like Dobby, a 19-month-old French bulldog who was taken in by the RSPCA's Mount Noddy Animal Centre in West Sussex. Dobby had been trafficked into the UK from Lithuania and was plagued with severe and painful health problems, which eventually required significant surgery. The RSPCA point out that importing sick puppies with zoonotic diseases into the UK not only poses a risk to public health, but can also lead to the very sad outcome of the animal needing to be euthanised after enduring a short, wretched life of pain and suffering. And then what about mutilation? Something members have been raising across the chamber this morning. This includes horrific acts of cruelty, such as tail docking, ear cropping, and the declawing of cats. Ear cropping has been illegal for over 20 years in England and Wales, and thank goodness. But the RSPCA reported a 1,243% increase in incidents of ear cropping in dogs reported to them between 2015 and 2021. That's such a staggering figure, it's worth repeating it again. A 1,243% increase in incidents of ear cropping in dogs. How absolutely despicable, Madam Deputy Speaker. No wonder so many animal rights campaign groups have been pleading with the government for so many years to bring forward measures to curb this cruel trade. The RSPCA tell us that current loopholes in the law that permit the import of dogs with cropped ears offers a defence in court for those responsible for illegal ear cropping here in the United Kingdom. This helps them to avoid prosecution for abuses of dogs that were made illegal under the Animal Welfare Act 2006. Dog lovers across the United Kingdom are desperate for this horrific practice to be stopped once and for all. Kitten smuggling raises further welfare concerns that I suspect will distress members across the House. Cats Protection is the UK's largest cat welfare charity. They provide administrative support to the all-party parliamentary group on cats that I was proud to co-chair for many years before I was appointed to the Shadow Cabinet by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition. They have produced a most helpful briefing paper on the bill before us today. It notes that their 2023 survey found that 3% of the cats purchased in the United Kingdom over the previous 12 months have been sourced from abroad. We have no idea what conditions those cats or kittens were subject to during travel. But we know the long journeys they are forced to endure can cause them significant pain, fear and distress. That's not something anyone would wish to impose on a beloved family pet or indeed on any animal where it can be avoided. This bill is such an important opportunity in preventing so much needless suffering. The bill will crack down on puppy and kitten smuggling by closing loopholes in the law that have been mercilessly exploited by dishonest and criminal commercial traders. The bill reduces the number of animals that may enter Great Britain in a motor vehicle during a single non-commercial journey to 5. This will help stop smugglers who pretend larger cargoes of animals are their own pets, when in reality they're intended for sale in this country. For similar reasons, the bill reduces the number of animals that can be brought into the country by means other than a motor vehicle to just 3. This will be of huge benefit in reducing the level of kitten and puppy smuggling into the United Kingdom. The RSPCA has found criminal gangs using routes like this to smuggle animals into the country. They then hire short-let properties, such as Airbnbs, to trick buyers into believing their puppy or kitten comes from a good home and has been well cared for by the animal's mother. The animal's new owners, of course, are incredibly distressed when they find out their new pet may have a serious illness, infection, or behavioural problems caused by being removed from the mother far too young. It can even cost the new owners thousands of pounds in vet bills as they try to care for their animal. And of course, in many cases, the animal may die.
On that particular point, I've had a constituent get in touch with me because they did go and get a dog. They thought it was a legitimate one, and then when they got it home, it had so many complications but already the children have bonded with that, and they did end up having to take out a loan to cover all of the vet's fees. So surely there needs to be more to do to prosecute these people that are causing so much direct cost to the innocent victims of the pet owners.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her intervention, and she makes, through that example, the most compelling case for why this legislation is necessary and why it should be brought in as soon as possible. Because families that go out to buy a family pet are aghast, appalled, distressed to find out when they get them home that that animal is not the healthy, well-cared-for pet they had thought they were buying, but has been subject to abuse, and that the animal may have behavioural or health problems that will cost them potentially sometimes thousands of pounds. It's simply unfair. Now, this bill gives the authorities in different parts of the United Kingdom, the devolved governments, the power to prohibit or restrict the transport of dogs or cats or ferrets into the UK for the purpose of promoting the welfare of the imported animals, since this too has often been used as cover for the illegal import of ill-treated or sick animals for sale as pets. The bill requires regulations to be made covering England, Scotland and Wales to prohibit the import of dogs or cats that are below the age of 6 months, are more than 42 days pregnant, or which have been mutilated through declawing or ear cropping or tail docking or other forms of mutilation of the animal. These are extremely important measures that will give a significant boost to animal welfare. There's been a huge increase in the import of heavily pregnant dogs and cats. Often they have been stolen from their loving owners in continental Europe and smuggled into the UK in the most appalling conditions. The criminal gang's intention, of course, is to sell the puppies or kittens as quickly as possible after they're born. They don't care that the animals may have been made sick by the conditions in which they were transported, or even if the animals were born prematurely as a result of trauma inflicted on the mother. This is purely and simply a criminal money-making operation that needs to be stopped as quickly as possible.
Giving way, I am one of the most passionate people about animal welfare in this place, and it's lovely to see some new converts from the Labour benches discussing animal welfare today, and the front bench. But I'd be interested as to his thoughts as well on Labour's determination to prevent single-sex spaces being discussed today, because that is also important to my constituents.
Well, I'm very disappointed indeed that the honourable member has attempted to politicise an important point. We're talking about the welfare of animals. We're talking about...
Order. For the sake of clarity, I'm afraid there was a lot of noise, so I didn't hear exactly what the honourable lady said. But just for the sake of clarity, we are discussing this bill and only this bill. Mr. Reid.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And members on this side consider animal welfare to be important. It's important that the opposition is able to make our points on the record so that we can influence this bill and, if possible, strengthen it. Because we think the government has been slow to the point of negligence in bringing forward these proposals so that we can ensure the welfare of animals. Now, there have been few measures. I'm welcoming these provisions now. There have been few measures introduced in recent years. Yeah.
Does he agree with me that it's important, if this bill is to be a success, that there are enforcement and punishment measures that enable it to be a success? And can he press the Minister, as I did earlier, to be very clear in his reply about what those are and how they will back up the measures in this bill to make sure we can put a stop to these evil trades?
Well, I'm very grateful to her for making those points, and I can see the Minister was listening carefully to what she had to say, as I was, and I shall look forward to the Minister's response to those points when he's on his feet. I did want to say there have been few measures introduced in recent years which have as many parallel benefits for animal welfare, human beings and wider socio-economic stability as this bill proposes. The third-party ban introduced in 2021 sought to address many issues of animal welfare concern around domestic breeding through tighter licensing obligations on breeders and a ban on third-party sales. But it was full of loopholes that allowed unscrupulous breeders to continue their activities with far too little change. The law proved so weak that not a single prosecution has taken place under this law, and fresh legislation is urgently needed to close these loopholes and bring this abusive trade to an end. If the United Kingdom is to maintain its position as a world leader in animal welfare, in the face of emerging threats and concerns and in line with the wishes of the British public, this bill must become law as quickly as possible. Puppy smuggling is a despicable criminal activity which causes suffering to animals and heartache and financial cost to their owners. It helps fund organised criminal enterprises that exploit human beings as well as animals and represents a significant threat of disease transmission, as my right honourable friend, the member for Garston, was pointing out earlier during the debate. Now, Labour is proud to support this bill as it progresses through this House, and we will seek to make it stronger, just as we did with the Kept Animals Bill before the government abandoned it. It is, of course, regrettable that the government has taken so long to act on these issues, and while I have congratulated the honourable member for North Devon for bringing forward her private member's bill, it is disappointing that the government chose not to include the measures in a government bill that might have proved a more secure way of ensuring the legislation is passed swiftly and intact. There are other animal welfare measures being presented to this House as private members' bills instead of as government legislation. The Pet Abduction Bill, introduced in December last year, is another example of this. And we should not forget about all the other animal welfare commitments made by this government that appear to have disappeared into thin air.
Yes. Does he agree with me the mess that we've also made on the XL Bulldog process, where we've ended up banning breeds of dogs rather than actually regulating...
Order! Order! The honourable gentleman hasn't been here all morning, so perhaps he hasn't quite picked up that this bill is quite narrow and it doesn't include the subject that he's just raised. And in this wind-up speech, it's necessary that we stick completely to the bill. I know he'll understand. Mr. Reid.
Well, I'm grateful to him for his intervention, and I think his point has been made already there. But what as well about the government's promise? We're looking at animal welfare. What about the government's promise to protect our hard-working farmers from low-welfare imports produced during methods that would be illegal if they were used here in the United Kingdom? The government can't really claim to be interested in animal welfare if they sign trade deals that permit lower welfare standards for animals outside this country. It's not fair on the livestock involved, and it's certainly not fair on UK producers and British farmers. Quite simply, the government is wrong to ignore the interests of farmers, consumers' expectations of higher animal welfare standards, and the well-being of the affected animals in the decisions that they've taken. Now, similarly, many campaigners are asking, what's happened to the proposed consultation on banning cages for farmed animals? This was promised by the government nearly 3 years ago in their action plan for animals back in May 2021, but there's been no consultation and no ban, and members want to know why not. We were promised action on imports of fur and foie gras. The action plan for animals stated that the government is committed to building a clear...
Order. The honourable gentleman will have heard when the honourable gentleman there intervened upon him. I explained that this is a narrow bill and we must stick to the narrow confines of this bill. My ruling then applied to the honourable gentleman, so obviously it applies to the Shadow Minister as well.
I'm very grateful to Madam Deputy Speaker. I was merely countering some of the claims made by members on the government benches that they had been promoting animal welfare as a government when in fact they've been doing the opposite. So I was merely putting the opposition's case to points that they've been able to make to make in this chamber. Now, the measures that are in this private members' bill were originally included in the Conservative Party manifesto on which they were elected. And it does the reputation of politicians across this House no good at all if a government once elected simply ignores their manifesto. Now, the Honourable Member for Wakefield, in his speech, pointed out how proud he was that when Labour was last in government, we implemented landmark animal welfare legislation, including banning cosmetic testing on animals, stopping fur farming and ending hunting with dogs. That's a proud track record on animal welfare, but the work has to continue because there's still so much more to do, and the measures before us today in this private members' bill are part of that. If our party earns the trust of the British people at the next general election, we will bring forward further and comprehensive legislation to strengthen animal welfare and animal rights. But in the meantime, we are proud to stand alongside the Honourable Member for North Devon and the proposals she has put before us today in her private members' bill. They are sensible, humane, practical, and they deserve the full support of every member right across this House. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister Mark Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I first of all congratulate my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, and thank her for bringing this bill forward. It's an important bill for Parliament, and I hope that members across the House will agree that the UK has some of the highest welfare standards anywhere in the world, and we have a proud history of being at the forefront of protecting animals. I'm confident that members in all parts of the House will agree with me that those animals actually have been of great support to individuals and families, particularly during COVID-19, where certainly my pets were a great support to me and often helped to keep you sane whilst you are under pressure in your everyday pursuits. So it would be remiss of me not to put on the record my three dogs, Tessa, Barney and Maisie, and my cat, Parsnip. And there's been a proud tradition this morning of mentioning various pets, including Harry, George, Henry, Bruce, Snowy, Maisie, Scampy, Becky 1, Becky 2, Tiny, Tully, Pippa, Kenneth, Roger, Poppy, June, Lucky, Lulan, Brooke, Lucy, Marcus, and Tobias, who were the dogs, not forgetting Perdita, Naylor, Colin, sadly no longer with us, Frank, two Smudgers, Atlee, Warner, Hetty, Stanley, Meerkat, Sue, Solanke, Cousins, Othello, Clapton, Trigger, sadly no longer with us, and Pixie, who are the cats. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I omitted earlier to put on the record the names of my own dogs, Clemmy, Peppy and Ebony. And Clemmy, as we all know, came third in the Westminster Dog of the Year show in 2022.
Well, he's corrected the record. There were, of course, two ferrets, one of who'd passed away, Rowlett and Oscar. With that, of course, the House also will want to feed into the member for North Norfolk because he thinks about naming his next cat after rock stars, and I would put to him the name Chesney was not on his list. Can I say, over the years, the number of owners travelling with their pets actually has increased significantly, with non-commercial pet movements into the UK rising from approximately 100,000 in 2011 to over 320,000 in 2023. And the number of dogs and cats and ferrets imported under the commercial rules has also significantly increased over recent years. In 2016, over 37,000 cats and dogs and ferrets were imported into the UK, but by 2023, that figure had risen to 44,000. The vast majority of those were actually dogs. Now, alongside this growth in genuine pet movements, we know that there is an increase in unscrupulous people abusing the pet travel system to import dogs and cats illegally. The government takes the issue of public smuggling and other illegal importations of low welfare movements of pets very seriously, and it is an abhorrent trade which causes suffering to animals. Measures to tackle puppy smuggling were originally included in the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill, but in May 2023 the government took the decision to withdraw the Kept Animals Bill due to the scope of the bill being extended beyond the original manifesto commitments and the action plan for animal welfare. Now, we committed at that time to ensure that all measures in that bill would be delivered through other means, and I'm therefore pleased to announce that the government will be fully supporting the Animal Welfare Import of Dogs and Cats and Ferrets Bill today through Parliament. And I'm also delighted to say that this is actually the last legislative measure within the Kept Animals Bill to be brought forward, fulfilling that promise made when the Kept Animals Bill was withdrawn less than a year ago. Now, this bill will actually go further than the Kept Animals Bill. It will crack down on pet smuggling by closing loopholes in the current pet travel rules. The bill will reduce the number of dogs, cats and ferrets that can enter Great Britain under the non-commercial pet travel rules from 5 persons to 5 per vehicle, so from 5 per person to 5 per vehicle, and 3 per foot and air passenger. This will be a significant decrease in the volume of animals that one person can travel with, and will also help prevent deceitful traders cramming their vans with tens of dogs. Now, of course, I give well to Honourable Lady.
Grateful to him, and I hesitate to say ferrets again, but I am saying. He may recall that I asked him whether or not there was an issue of abuse with ferrets of the same kind that we see with dogs and cats. This might be an opportune moment for him to tell the House on that, about that.
Just about to come to that to try and satisfy her interest. Now, I'm tempted to say that the ferrets were purely put in there because of the honourable member for Banbury and her love for ferrets, but the honest truth is it's simply because they are a risk of carrying rabies, and it's an opportunity to try and assist with that challenge. Now, as I was saying, the bill will also ensure that the movement of dogs and cats and ferrets into Great Britain must be linked to the movement of the owner, to fall under the non-commercial pet travel rules. To move under the pet travel rules, the pet and the owner must travel within 5 days of each other. These measures will make it more difficult and less profitable for traders to fraudulently bring dogs and cats and ferrets into Great Britain for sale under the disguise of owners travelling with their pets. The bill will also provide further powers to tackle the problem of low welfare imports of dogs, cats and ferrets into the United Kingdom. The bill ensures that these powers will be used to ban the bringing of into Great Britain of puppies and kittens under 6 months and dogs and cats that are heavily pregnant or mutilated. Now, introducing these measures through the secondary legislation allows the government time to work with the industry, enforcement bodies and stakeholders to develop robust measures with appropriate exemptions that can be enforced effectively. And I know the Honourable Lady has made a number of points about that. The government is committed to delivering that secondary legislation as soon as possible following the royal assent of this bill, but I hope the Honourable Lady will be assured that as introduced by this government, the maximum sentence now for abuse of animals has risen to 5 years in prison. That is a huge deterrent to those who would abuse animals, and of course those working within Border Force and at our ports, championed of course by the Honourable Member for Dover on a regular basis, will do all they can to stop those imports and make sure that we are in the right place. Finally, I'd like to thank my honourable friend from North Devon again for taking forward this important bill, and look forward to seeing it progress through the remaining stages in the House and in the other place. Thank you very much.
With the leave of the House, Selaine Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you to the Minister, and thank you to honourable and right honourable friends who've spoken today. I also wanted to thank my team for all the work they've put in behind the scenes to get to this point today. Tara Benneman, Emily Gordon and Alice Richards on maternity leave, watching at home with baby Luke and cat Beanie. And also to remind members that Pixie, the one-eyed spaniel, and Bruce, the French bulldog, will be available for media engagement in W3 at the end of today's sitting.
Thank you. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye.